whatever we are. It's actually the mayor's.
Yeah, we'll put it in the presentation.
Do your own. Counselor Rivera said that the Bible was worn and read and
We're here to help. I'm from the government. I'm here to help. I call the meeting to order. Councillor Ives will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Councillor Rivera will lead us in the salute to the New Mexico flag, and Councillor Abeyta has an invocation for us.
Psalm 19, 8 through 15. The law of the Lord is perfect, restoring the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The ordinances of the Lord are true, they are righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is thy servant warned. In keeping of them there is great reward. Who can discern errors? Clear thou me from hidden faults. Keep back thy servant also from presumptuous sins. that they may not have dominion over me, then shall I be faultless, and I shall be clear from great transgression. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable before thee, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Thank you. Now, if there are any remembrances, Councilor Villarreal.
Thank you. I would just want to send condolences to the family of Jared Enlow, who was a friend of mine from junior high and high school, who passed away suddenly at a young age. And just wanted to send love and prayers to his family. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Weber,
Here.
Councilor Beta,
Here.
Councilor Harris. Here. Councilor Ives,
Here.
Councilor Lindell. Councilor Rivera. Here. Councilor Romero Worth.
Here.
Councilor Vihel Coppler.
Here.
Councilor Villarreal.
Present.
You do have a quorum present, Mayor.
Thank you.
Yes.
The agenda, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Mayor, if I could, we are going to be adding, under presentations, a proclamation for Hispanic Heritage Month in Santa Fe, and we are also postponing item 10K to October the 10th. And 10K is dealing with the public bank in New Mexico.
Okay, we will put that into the next session then. Thank you. So with that, is there approval of the agenda as amended? Is there a
Move to approve as
Second.
amended.
Second.
all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Not voting. Motion carries. We now move to the consent calendar. Items to be removed. Councilor Ives.
The only item I had was a few quick items with 10I.
Thank you, Mayor. Item A and item G.
Item G, A and G. Any others from the consent calendar? Yes, sir, Counselor.
Sorry, a couple of questions on item A as well.
Okay, so we will doubly remove it. Any others? Counselor Harris, you good? All good. Okay, very well. In that case,
Move for approval.
Second.
all right, please call the roll.
Thank you. This is approval as amended. Councilor Beta,
Yes.
Councilor Harris, Councilor Ives,
Yes.
Councilor Lindell. Yes. Councilor Rivera,
Yes.
Councilor Romero Worth,
Yes.
Councilor Vihel Coppler,
Yes.
Councilor Villarreal,
Yes.
Mayor Weber.
Yes,
Thank you. The motion has been approved.
thank you. Minutes from September 12th. Yes, Counselor Vihel Coppler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I note that I did not attend that meeting, but I do want to make a change, if allowed. On page 6, number 11, that item lists me as a co-sponsor, to which I did get corrected most everywhere else, but apparently not here.
Not in that record. Okay,
So
so
I'm not a co-sponsor on that bill.
okay, so we will amend the minutes accordingly.
Thank you.
Other amendments to the minutes? Is there a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Not voting, the motion carries. Presentations, I have, yes, would this be an appropriate time for me to do this? All right, thank you. I have the great honor of reading a proclamation, and I'll do it very quickly and just from this chair, if that's okay with everybody. Whereas National Hispanic Heritage Month was created by Congress and President Lyndon Johnson in 1968 to recognize and celebrate Hispanic Americans and their contributions to our society and our culture, and whereas National Hispanic Heritage Month honors the people of Spain, Mexico, the the Caribbean, and Central and South America, who play a valuable and important role in our communities and whose ancestors were central to much of our history. And whereas throughout our nation, Hispanics are advancing our economy, improving our communities, bettering our country, and transforming our industries with new and innovative ideas. And whereas Santa Fe proudly honors the Hispanic culture that dates back more than 400 years, celebrating the strength of diverse contributions that help build the community we love. And whereas Hispanic people in Santa Fe have made significant contributions to Santa Fe and northern New Mexico's history, religion, art, food, music, culture, education, and economy. And whereas Santa Fe celebrates the contributions of Hispanic people through special annual events, including the Fiesta de Santa Fe, the traditional Spanish market, the winter Hispanic market, contemporary Hispanic market. And whereas Santa Fe honors the contributions of Hispanic people daily at El Rancho de las Golondrinas, the Palace of the Governors, New Mexico History Museum, Museum of Spanish Colonial Art, New Mexico Museum of Art, through vibrant performing arts such as mariachi and flamenco, and with world-class New Mexican and Mexican cuisine. And whereas Hispanic Heritage Month in Santa Fe includes the Santa Fe Fiestas, the anniversary of independence of Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Mexico, and Chile. And whereas Hispanic and Latina New Mexicans make up 51% of the population of Santa Fe County. Now, therefore, I, Alan M. Weber, Mayor of the City of Santa Fe, New Mexico, do hereby proclaim September 15th through October 15th, 2018, as Hispanic Heritage Month in Santa Fe. Thank you. Very good. Yes. While we discourage applause in general, with Councilor Villarreal leading the applause, I think we're safe. Very good. Any other presentations that are in order at the moment? If not, we will move to item 10A. And I will recognize Councilor Lindell to speak to this first.
Thank you, Mayor. I have just a few questions about this and then a few comments about it. This contract is for $75,000 a year, and it is for 4 years. So it's really for $300,000 at the cost of removing trapping gophers at $28 per gopher. So we're talking about the removal of almost 2,700 gophers per year. Is that right?
Yes. Mayor Weber and Councilor Lindell, members of the City Council. Our previous IPM program manager, Victor Lucero, worked on this and based the figure on the number of animals that we observed in the field. That was Victor's job, was to monitor pests and then to write up a management program. We've done everything in our power to dissuade the fossorial rodents from inhabiting our baseball fields and our soccer and football fields, our play fields. But because it is irrigated turf, trees, and shrubbery, they find it delectable smorgasbord, and they tend to move into these irrigated areas, which we have developed and introduced and maintained for safe recreational use. So it really comes down to a difficult choice between protecting children and adults playing on these fields or allowing the rodents to reside in peace.
So did we have any other consideration of ways to eradicate this population? And I don't know if 2,700 is, I mean, I'm not saying that you should know. I don't think you should. But is 2,700 really how many? And if we would, by some chance, eliminate 2,700, is that really the population and it takes care of the problem? And what's the chances that all 2,700 are eradicated?
Mayor Weber and Councilor Lindell, members of the City Council, that's an excellent question, and it is the question. First of all, we never intend to eradicate a species, rather bring it to a control level that we can live with, cohabitate. This goes for tree pests or turf fungi, et cetera. The intention is never to eradicate the species, but at a controllable level. Second of all, we set the price tag or the value of the contract that we're requesting approval for tonight very high. Just like we do our prairie dog removal contracts, we set this upper limit far above our expectations, so we don't have to come back or ask the city manager to grant us a budget adjustment request later in the year. We used to use carbon monoxide poisoning in the trenches. We never were sure how many of the rodents were dispatched in this manner. Immediately after we would treat with carbon monoxide, we would collapse the trench with the tractor. And there were questions about the humane nature of that procedure, and so we've chosen this to be the more sure means of dispatching the rodents in situ and most humane approach to it.
Well, if this is the upper limit and it is high, do we have any options for live trapping and moving to a different location?
Mayor and Councilor Lindell, we have never investigated that option. It would include finding a location in which to release them. This would have to be city-owned land, would have to be suitable for such population densities as we would introduce, or then we would be somewhat compounding the problem or kicking the can down the road, some people call it, or pushing it onto neighbors, private property owners, then have to deal with the problem that we chose not to mitigate.
Is this contract in effect right now?
Ma'am.
Okay. Well, what I have to say about this is that I couldn't possibly put my name on a contract that has to do with trapping. I consider trapping to be extremely cruel, and it's nothing that I could even consider supporting. I'm disappointed that we haven't investigated live trapping and moving and finding another place for these living creatures, and I would encourage my other counselors to join me in asking that we find, at least investigate how we could live trap these creatures and where might be an appropriate place to put them. So, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Rivera?
Thank you, Mayor. Richard, can you take a minute just to explain the difference that what the gophers are doing to the parks in comparison to what the prairie dogs are doing?
Mayor Weber and Councilor Rivera, that too is an excellent question. We find the prairie dogs seem to habitate open space and wild areas. And the pocket gophers seem to gravitate towards this irrigated turf land. We do have prairie dogs in some of our irrigated parks, but by far the predominance of the pocket gopher and the burrows that they leave covered up, almost invisible, are the dangers to human play in the parks. The prairie dogs, as you know, are protected by an ordinance passed by a council much like this one, and we do honor the language in the ordinance to the letter. and the spirit of that law, and we do pay to relocate those to a site that has been established by the National Fish and Wildlife Service for just that purpose, receiving Gunnison's prairie dog and relocation. Unfortunately, we do not have a site that will accept the pocket gophers under any such conservation program. So we're faced with a really tough dilemma. As we all know, life is a series of tough choices, left or right, up or down. And this is the one where we've chosen to protect the children that play in the park from those hidden dangers of underground burrows and irrigated turf. And I really do not like the idea of trapping gophers and wholesale and removing the remains. But I repeat, this is a choice that we faced, was making play areas safe or removing the opportunity to play ball or run in a grassy field. So it was a tough decision, but it's the one we chose.
How deep can those invisible burrows be?
I wish that Victor was here to answer that question, Counselor. I know you all recognize Victor's expertise in almost all matters biologic. But we have encountered warrens as deep as 4 feet below surface. But for the most part, the burrows that they travel in are about 18 to 24 inches deep.
Have we had any kids or adults injured in any of our parks, say within the last year or two?
Mayor Weber, Councilor Rivera, I would have to check on the exact dates, but yes, we have had accounts of injury to sports participants in rodent burrows.
Okay.
But I will get that information for you both.
Thank you. My last question is in the contract on page 4, it talks about traps will be set at least 8 hours and up to 24 hours prior to being checked. What kind of safety precautions are going to be taken around the trap areas while they're set?
Mayor Weber, Councilor Rivera, members of the council, that's an excellent question as well. Having watched Victor research this particular method, what we find is that unlike prairie dogs who leave their burrows open and then build a wall berm around the entrance for several reasons. One is to sneak out of the hole and look around before they stand upright and begin their social behaviors. Unlike these prairie dogs, a pocket gopher will pull dirt in behind them once they've made an entrance into their burrow and actually plug the hole. So we imitate this behavior by opening that trench, setting the trap. We have a leader that leads outside of the trench, and then we cover that back up. And by the way, we do not leave traps open for 24 hours and in the ground for 24 hours. They're picked up as before the team leaves, and I'll make sure that is corrected in the contract language.
So there's nowhere within close distance that would accept these gophers?
Mayor Weber and Councilor Rivera, I will research that whether this passes tonight or not. We will research an alternative method, as we are bound by the Integrated Pest Management Ordinance. Regardless of the protective or the endangered status or not of a pest animal, we do exhaust the cultural, mechanical, biologic, and all control mechanisms before we go to the lethal remedy. So we will definitely look into this. But to my knowledge, there are no open spaces that we could release them to without incurring a different form of liability at some point down the road.
And this company doesn't do any CO2 disposal of gophers? Did you say CO2 is what the city? CO?
Yes. I can't speak to their practices. I don't know if that's one of their offerings, but that's not a part of this contract. This is all mechanical trapping and removal.
And why did we pick mechanical versus?
Well, with the carbon monoxide, we were collapsing the trenches without the only way to investigate is to excavate, and these are turf areas. So we weren't sure of what was happening down in the Warren, where they raise their young. We weren't sure if we were burying live kits or, we just don't know what was going on underground. And then, of course, it was the fact that the collapsed trench had to be backfilled immediately, and this will give us a little bit more time to fill in the trench to maintain safe playing conditions.
Thank you, Mayor. That's all I had.
Thank you, Counselor. Other questions? No? Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve.
Is there a second?
Councillor Harris? Councillor Ives?
Yes.
Councillor Lindell? Councillor Rivera?
Yes.
Councillor Romero Worth?
Yes.
Councillor Vihel Coppler?
Yes.
Councillor Villarreal?
No.
Councillor Beta?
Yes.
Mayor Weber?
Yes.
Motion has been approved.
Thank you. We move to item 10G. And again, I turn to Councillor Lindell for questions and concerns about 10G.
Sorry, mic's on. Just a couple of very quick questions. Is this a contractor that we've worked with before?
Mr. Mayor, councilors, Councilor Lindell, it is indeed a contractor we've worked with before. They were the contractor who installed the family locker room at the Fort Marcy complex. As Councilor Harris pointed out in the Public Works Committee, they recently worked at the airport on the, I believe, a baggage scanner. They recently worked at Lafarge Library, and to the best of my knowledge at the moment, those are the three projects that come to my mind.
Okay.
Or two.
Do we have anything in a contract like this that, for example, if the contractor goes off the job for a month and the contract goes 3 or 4 months past when the completion date is, that they're penalized for that?
Mr. Mayor, councilors, Councilor Lindell, indeed, in this contract, I believe it's page 30 of your packet, underneath unit prices, number 5, it says the bidder agrees that, and there are a few things outlined here. 1, the start date will be 10 days after the notice to proceed. They are stating they will complete the project within 60 days of the notice to proceed, and then they propose paying a $250 per day liquid damages back to the city if for some reason they fail to meet that 60-day timeline.
I appreciate that. I just had a remembrance of a nightmare of a roofing project that happened at Fort Marcy, and that was the reason for the questions. I'll make a motion to approve.
Second?
Okay.
Councillor Ives?
Yes.
Councillor Lindell? Councillor Rivera?
Yes.
Councillor Romero Worth?
Yes.
Councillor Vihel Coppler?
Yes.
Councillor Villarreal?
Yes.
Councillor Beta?
Yes.
Councillor Harris? Mayor Weber?
Yes.
Motion has been approved.
Thank you. I move to item I and recognize Councillor Ives.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a few questions which I had posed to our attorney, and it sounds like we have a great team assembled to represent the city in the opioid litigation, and I understand we have one of the attorneys. Are you Mr. Daniels? I am. Welcome. It's great to have you in Santa Fe, and hopefully we can move this through quickly. I just had a few questions on the contract, which I'll direct to our attorney. One, of course, the contract ostensibly was with the Salazar firm down in Albuquerque, but there were identified in the contract a number of other firms participating in representing the city in this litigation. So, and those are contained in paragraph 3C on page 3 of the agreement, page 5 in our packets. And I was hoping that we could simply make sure all the firms are contractors, as they all will be representing the city. So I would love to amend the contract to add the other firms as contractors to the city for purposes of this litigation. The other item I had was just a particular item on costs. In the contract, page 6, page 8 in our packets, it had referenced that photocopies would be charged at 10 cents a page, as would facsimile copies. And then there was a 43 cents per mile charged. And the question I had asked earlier was with regards to how that would be potentially shared if this group of firms, as undoubtedly it will, would have an extended number of clients involved in the litigation. So was interested, rather than having a set figure in there, just to put something along the lines that costs shall be charged at a reasonable rate and shall be charged at the least amount charged and shall be charged in an amount not to exceed that of the least amount charged to any other client in this litigation. A sort of most favored nations provision.
That's absolutely not a problem. And as far as the mileage and stuff.
Thank you.
Councilors Matters, thank you. As far as like the mileage and stuff, you can just cut that out. I'm not tracking copies. That's not how we make our money. So I'm not the least bit worried about that. You can just take it out of the contract if you like.
And not so much looking to do that, just to make sure it's reasonable.
Absolutely, it's not a problem at all.
I have long experience in litigation, and we have buildings in Santa Fe that were reputedly built off the copy charges charged in particular large-scale litigation that ran through this part of the country about 30 years ago. So,
let me assure you, our copiers don't even have counters on them, so I'm not worried about that.
No worries. Thank you. That was all I had, and with those amendments to the agreement, I would move to approve.
Okay. Second.
Mayor Weber, a quick question.
Yes.
Councilor Ives, did you want to address the liability coverage as well?
Oh, well, if all the firms are added as contractors, presumably if in the untoward event of malpractice of some sort occurring or other injury or liability, all the policies would presumably be available to respond appropriately based on determination of court in rendering any judgment on that. So I thought by including the firms that would all follow necessarily. But if language changes are necessary, please add them.
So Mayor Weber, Councilor Ives, the only thing would be the minimum required currently is the 1.5. So I think if we want to change the minimum required to maintain, then we should change the language. If you want to just, so they do have liability coverage that is higher than that currently. Right. We don't have anything in place requiring them to maintain that. So I didn't know if that was...
I know the minimum, at least, of the firms that were identified was a $3 million for one of the firms. So if the firms are amenable to raising it to the minimum carried by that one particular firm, and of course that is the minimum, there can be more, that would be fine.
Okay. So is that part of the motion then?
I would make that part of the motion, yes,
right.
please.
Thank you for the clarification.
Is that acceptable to the second?
Very good. So we have a motion as amended and a second as amended. Everybody good?
Councilor Lindell? Yes. Councilor Reed?
Yes.
Councilor Romero Worth?
Yes.
Councilor Vihel Coppler?
Yes.
Councilor Villarreal?
Yes.
Councilor Rita?
Yes.
Councilor Harris? Councilor Ives?
Yes.
Mayor Weber?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We now move to item number 11, an information-only item. Mr. Brown, maybe you want to, I don't know whether you want to wait and respond to questions or you want to give us a quick overview about what this item is? It's really...
Mayor Weber, I'd be happy to give a quick intro, if I could. So Mayor Weber, members of the council, you probably recall on August 29th, you all saw this as an item which was actually a reassignment to the Chamber of Commerce of this contract. The governing body had expressed concern with how that was done, so the item was postponed. And we came back as staff, and I asked staff to do two things. The first was to look at the what and why behind this contract, and to that I turned to Matt Brown, and the answer was, it really came down to that the assignment of this, or excuse me, the issuing of this contract was good for the economic development position of the city, and in fact the Chamber of Commerce was well positioned to do these networking events. So at that point it came down to the how, and so City Attorney Aaron McSherry issued an email, an opinion that was sent to you all. And the appropriate way to deal with this was a small contract for $20,000 to the Chamber of Commerce, which in normal circumstances would be done under the city manager. This was put on as an informational item tonight. Since you all had seen it previously, we felt it was best that you understand the what and the why and the how behind it. I'm certain that Matt is able to answer any questions about the first two, the what and the why, and City Attorney Aaron McSherry could answer questions about how, if you would have them. But I thought it was pertinent to give you all an introduction from me.
Very good, thank you. Any comments or questions? Councilor Vihil-Coppler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have been very interested in what has occurred here, and I very much appreciate staff talking with me about this. And, you know, I'm a little bit amazed, but I will tell you that, you know, I'll remind this council of our meeting on August 29th, and that was that there was really no good reason to my satisfaction as to why this contract had to be moved from the city's authority and change contractors completely to the Chamber of Commerce from Andrea Romero Consulting without a reasonable answer. The answer I got was not really germane to what we were doing here today, but that's neither here nor there. What I believe is occurring here, and let me remind you, this contract only had 7 months left. So you know, it piqued my interest as to why the city would want to be a pass-through or put itself in a position to be a pass-through. So during that meeting, I think there was some disagreement that the city manager could unilaterally move this contract and change contractors completely. I also recognize that the contract had lapsed. My experience here on the council, even as recent as last Monday, was that sometimes contracts lapse, but the work still needs to be done, and with council action, we take care of that. Instead, what I see here is that, you know, I believe that the city manager has circumvented the council's authority. And the spirit of the discussion that we had on August 29th was that we wanted this to get its full review of the third year of the contract with a mere $20,000 left, and that I believe the Finance Committee Chair, Councilor Abeyta, asked that this go to Finance Committee, which it didn't, and of course that it be brought back to today's meeting, you know, with whatever decision would be made. Instead, we have what I consider to be a total circumvention of what I thought was going to occur, and I believe what this council was led to believe was going to occur. So rather than follow through, even if it was going to get approved to go to the chamber, the city manager then instead just created his own contract with the chamber with the $20,000 and call it a day. I think, yes, according to our attorney, it is legal, but that doesn't make it right. I don't like not having the council follow through on something it took some time that night. The other thing is I think this sets a bad precedent. And maybe it doesn't go as far as an audit exception in the future, but it just seems like that's not at all the direction that we had spoken about. I know it's only information, but I just needed to say what I think about this action. Thank you.
Thank you. Other council members wish to either speak to this or have a question for either the city manager or for, Councilor Abeyta.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, what's the plan moving forward? I see this is a Fifth Amendment to this contract. So once the 20,000 is expended, what are we going to do in the future to, one, in my mind, avoid all the amendments? Are we going to go through an RFP process, or what's the plan with moving forward?
Mayor, Councilor Abeyta, thank you for that question. The plan moving forward will be during our lead up to the budgeting process. I would expect sometime around late November, early December, we will issue a new RFP seeking services similar to those being rendered by MIX currently, which would be the social networking for business community as well as an accelerator. And that's how we will go out and request those services to be proposed, and then we'll ultimately select the best candidate and vendor to do that. And like all of our PSAs, as far as I can see, they always are issued as a one-year contract with 3 additional options to renew annually to give them a total duration of 4 years at the discretion of the city. So if the city wants to exercise any of those subsequent annual renewals, we can choose to do so. So it provides us more flexibility rather than every single year having to issue a new RFP to try to secure the services that we need.
When you renew the contract, is that considered an amendment to the contract? And is that why there were 5 of these? Because they got renewed for 3 of the years?
I'll answer, and if legal counsel would like to answer that on top of that. But yes, in the past, the original contract with Andrew Romero Consulting, in subsequent years, although I wasn't here, those extensions were proposed and accepted, which got us to, as of June 30th of this past year when the contract expired, I think we were at the 4th amendment at that point.
So 3 of the amendments were a result of renewing it?
Bingo.
So,
yes.
Okay, so it's not like there were just 5 amendments and we kept adding. My concern is that we keep adding to the dollar amount with each amendment, because sometimes practice in the past and in my previous experiences, that's a way to get away from doing an RFP, because as long as you stay under a certain threshold. So, but in this case, it was just a renewal. 3 of the 5 amendments were renewals allowed by the original contract.
But the original contract was issued under an RFP because it anticipated that the cumulative value would exceed the minimum threshold. We would expect the same thing here. So we would not, in the future, issue just a PSA, because we'll anticipate that cumulatively, if we were to have those extensions over 2 or 3 years, it would go over that threshold, in which time we would be coming back to the governing body asking for approval of any of those extensions.
And the original RFP included up to 3 years of
the
renewals.
3 extensions. That would be my assumption, given that that's what the contract that was ultimately signed back in 2015.
Okay, so this will be the last amendment, and there'll be a new RFP that we're going to put out.
To clarify, this is not an amendment. What has been signed is a new contract with the chamber that will end on June 30th.
Okay, so there will not be amendments to that contract.
Correct. There are no. That ends. No extensions. No amendments. It ends on June 30th.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Mr.
Yes,
Mayor, on that
Councilor
point, just a
Villarreal.
clarification. So the amounts actually have been decreased, right? It hasn't that we're not increasing the contract.
That's correct.
They've actually gone down. Can you remind us about
Yes,
the amount?
yes, Mayor and Councilor Villarreal, we budgeted this year for $20,000 for MIX services. And so this contract is $20,000. It comports with the budget that was approved by the governing body.
And previously it was...
To clarify, I think her point was, has the amount consistently remained the same? Has it gone down?
Thank you, Mayor, Councilor Villarreal. Last year it was $40,000. It's actually fluctuated up and down over time from what I can see. The original, I believe, was in, the original contract was 20 or so because it was a partial year, and then it was 40. So this year is a decrease. As I said, with all the other contracts that got budget reductions, as Councilor Rivera questioned me vigorously at the last session, that was a part of the budgeting process, and during the mid-year review, we will look at this as well as all the others, if there is any opportunity for increase. But if we were to do that for this contract, we'd actually have to issue a new contract, right? 'Cause there's no ability to amend, there's no extensions or anything like that on this contract currently.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Councilor Vihil-Coppler.
If you could refresh my memory, I have forgotten, what was the total amount of the contract in the beginning? I know every year that had to be brought back for approval, not the contract itself, just the monies. So what was the total amount to the contractor?
Mayor, Councilor Vihil-Coppler, I apologize, I don't have the exact number off the top of my head. I think the total up through June 30th was somewhere in the 140 to 160 range, but I just don't have that number, but we could provide that to you.
I think, in my memory, I thought it was like $148,000. Could that
Sounds
be
about right, yeah.
somewhere
I mean, I was
here?
thinking 140 to 160, so somewhere in that range.
When you go out for RFP, as Councilor Abeyta was asking, are you envisioning that kind of money again?
I'm unable to answer that question at this time. I haven't done that analysis or strategic thinking around what the level of expenditure and cost we would anticipate. So I'm just not in a position to answer that right now.
But you will be in November.
Somewhere in November, December, yes, that's my focus, and that's
Okay.
my goal, yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Mayor, on that point, so wait, you said 148, but that's over how many years?
That would have been 3.5 years.
3.5 years. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? We're good? It's informational only, so there's no vote required, but I appreciate your being here to answer the questions. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Item number 12, I would appreciate it if Director Johnson would help guide us through this, which bears my name, but bears your thinking. So perhaps you could walk us through what we are doing with this item and why it's important and how we're trying to adjust a drafting problem.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor, members of the council. This action is a request to rescind the decision that you all made at the last meeting on September 12th regarding 3 joined applications, case number 2018-49, 2018-48, and 2018-50, which comprise the Los Solares Master Plan Amendment, the General Plan Amendment, and the associated rezoning. And the reason for requesting this action is that one of the representatives of the applicants came to us after the council action took place with concerns about the wording of stipulation or condition number 1. And it has to do with addressing the fugitive dust issue out there. It's very comprehensive and sweeping, is actually retroactive in nature, and was approved, went through the Planning Commission, City Attorney review before our current City Attorney and myself were on board and had an opportunity to take a look at it. So when the applicant came to staff and expressed concerns about how staff would apply this condition, I also had some concerns about it, just in terms of how we would be able to apply it over time in a consistent manner. It asks for a financial guarantee and of cost plus 10% for fugitive dust control measures, but without any guidance as to how that base cost would be developed. Dust is highly dependent on weather conditions, and we are experiencing abnormal weather conditions. At least that's the current trend. And having some kind of guidance about what are the basic assumptions and generate that number would be helpful. Also clarifying how this condition does or doesn't apply to those portions of Las Solares that are already built out, already have their final development approval, and are open for occupancy. It was vague about how that condition would be applied. The applicant had his own issues, primarily around this financial guarantee, and I believe there's a representative here that can speak to their concerns. So it really is twofold. Staff saw some issues in how we would apply this condition over time. The applicant had their own reasons for asking this condition to be looked at again. The only recourse would be to rescind the vote on all three applications, because this condition applies to all three, and then schedule a new public hearing with new notice, and that would happen on we estimate the earliest date available would be October 31st.
And the time in the interim would be used to come up with a more clarified series of preconditions. We wouldn't be eliminating them. We'd be trying to come to a clearer understanding about what the requirements are and what they apply to and what perhaps they don't apply to.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, that is correct. So again, this, at least the staff's intent, is not to eliminate this condition at all, but to improve the wording so that it can be more consistently and effectively applied.
Are there questions from the council? If we wish to do this, we need a motion. We need separate motions, I assume. One to rescind the decision, and then a second one to schedule another hearing.
Correct.
May I ask a question about that hearing? Maybe the city attorney could advise. At that hearing, are we limiting what the hearing will be about, or are we reopening the entire discussion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We would be limited to, with respect to condition of approval number 1. So it would be a limited scope.
We are not reopening the entire hearing. We are looking at one specific item.
That's correct. But you would have statements from the parties that are affected and from staff about that specific condition.
Okay, just to be clear. Yeah, Councilor Rivera.
I don't think so, but this wouldn't have to go back to the Planning Commission as well, since they were voting potentially on information they didn't have.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Rivera, I think that is another option you could have. I don't think that you have that as required, because it was something you could have done yourself at the last public hearing, was to clarify that particular condition. So you already had the authority. If you wanted the input of the Planning Commission, you could remand it to that commission, but I think it's well within the authority of the governing body to make that amendment, because you could have amended the condition at the last public hearing.
Okay, and I don't remember how the vote went, but I know we've done this before. Was it unanimous? Was there any nay votes in there?
I believe it was unanimous, Councilor. I don't think we have a negative vote to deal with. Other questions? Councilor Ives?
Just a point of order. It talks, the notice talked about a motion to rescind the decision of the governed body approving case 2018-50. And it says, for the purpose of further consideration with respect to condition of approval number 1 pertaining to stabilization of disturbed soil. And I'm wondering about the propriety of rescinding a decision, but it sounds like we're trying to say we're rescinding it only in part, but that's not how this appears to be noticed.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Ives, that's correct. If we had the specific replacement language, we could have the motion to consider specific amendment language. That would be the alternative. My understanding is a motion to reconsider should happen during the same meeting, and we don't have it unless there's a procedural rule that allows it to be at the next meeting. So rescind or a specific amendment would be the way to change a prior decision that's made at a prior meeting.
And I understand that. I know that does under reconsideration, it does speak to the next item, and quite frankly, because we haven't considered would we not be called upon to affirm findings and conclusions in this as a final act, triggering any appeals? In which case, we really haven't made that final decision. So I'm just wondering if a motion to reconsider and then to postpone to the meeting of October, whichever date, 11th or 31st, would be more appropriate.
So, Mayor Weber, Councilor Ives, you're suggesting it should be reconsider rather than rescind? I'm just clarifying the suggestion. I did look, it's section 35 of Robert's Rules that applies to this situation, and there's two options there. Basically, it's to rescind or amend something previously adopted if it's been adopted in final form at a prior meeting.
And part of what's generating my question is just, I don't see how we move to rescind. If we're rescinding the decision, we're rescinding the decision. I'm not sure you can rescind only that portion as relates to approval of Section 1. So I'm sort of posing that question, which I'm struggling with.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Ives, I think I understand better. So you're saying how could we limit the hearing to that purpose if we're rescinding? And I think that's a good question. I think the intent is that I think the governing body could, just by way of procedure, the mayor as presiding officer can limit times to reasonableness. If the governing body has already received enough, you can still rely upon the information entered during the public hearing previously. So I think the mayor as presiding officer could reasonably limit testimony to those items remaining.
And some of what I was asking in addition is, when is our action official for purposes of triggering notices of appeal and those types of things? And at least previously, some of the practice has been for us to take up at a meeting subsequent to that at which a matter was considered the findings and conclusions as a final act, which would mean that this would have been logically the meeting where we would have done this on this particular matter, but we're not doing that. So I'm wondering if reconsideration just makes more sense in the instance. Of course, that, I suppose, raises its own question with regards to notice.
Yeah, so Mr. Mayor, Councilor Ives, I think what you can do in terms of final action during the October hearing, if you're going to make additional findings that will cause a change to that condition, then we can adopt those findings at the subsequent meeting.
So what is our motion then? What are we doing by our motion here today?
So the suggestion is, Mr. Mayor, Councilor Ives, to undo the decision from the last meeting, September 12th. It would take away the effectiveness, so there would not be a final action on record currently. So there would be nothing for anyone to appeal currently. And so there would basically be no final action by the body on this matter.
In that case, why don't we proceed on that basis, and we'll see if anybody has any more in-depth questions on that. Hopefully not. But.
Okay. Yes, Councilor Rivera.
So this is really coming back because of financial language that's in there?
Excuse me, Councilor Rivera, members of the governing body. This has to do with a number of aspects, the financial guarantee being just one. It also has to do with the applicability. The language is extremely broad and includes all development within Las Solares, including development that's already been completed and approved. So the question was raised, if there happened to be landscaping maintenance happening at the new Starbucks on Cerrillos, that's within this master plan community. And if they create some dust as part of that landscaping maintenance, would they be subject to this condition? And there are other ordinances that apply to projects post-development, and so that is one of the clarifications that staff would like to make. The applicant has other corrected or modified language that we haven't looked at in detail, and so if you have, I would recommend that you speak or ask to speak to a representative of the applicant if you would like to know what their motivation is.
Sure.
Mayor and Councilors, my name's Jim Siebert. My address is 915 Mercer, Santa Fe. Let me explain how this came about. After the approval by the council, we looked at that condition and asked for a meeting with staff. And in that meeting with staff, because we weren't sure how to implement it, the issue came up that a letter of credit would be required from all owners within Las Solares. That just wasn't practical. We have 15 different landowners that are major landowners, and then we have another 100 or so households that are landowners. So it raised that particular issue, but I think if you take a look at the condition, what it emphasizes is the tackifier, this polymer emulsion. That is one aspect of dust control. And I was looking, Councilor Harris was good enough to send me a draft of an ordinance that the city's considering on dust control, and it's 19 pages long. The dust control has many aspects of it. First of all, you have ongoing construction activity, and then secondly, you have areas that have been graded, but there is no ongoing construction activity, and you have to deal with those much differently. We're not asking to get rid of the dust control regulations by any means. What we're asking to do is come back to you with a more comprehensive, implementable package of dust regulations.
Thank you. So, Ms. McSherry, if this would have come up 6 months from now when they start doing construction, how would it have been handled at that point?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Rivera, I think that's the reason it's being brought before the body is because staff was not sure how they wanted to enforce it and hadn't thought about this angle, at least. So what Ms. Johnson brought up in terms of the retroactivity.
I guess what I'm getting at is when changes are made after it's already been approved and too late to come back here, how are those dealt with?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Rivera, so a rescind wouldn't be permitted if the action has already taken effect. So that's one of the procedural periods of time where you couldn't rescind a decision. So there might be some argument on behalf of the parties in terms of process for the retroactivity in relation to their properties, and that would have been something we would have had to look at more closely. Did those parties have the appropriate opportunity to respond to that condition since they weren't, I believe they were noticed, but weren't necessarily directly at issue in the matter that was at hand?
But any changes would have been dealt with administratively?
Councilor Rivera, members of the council, at a point out in the future, as you're suggesting, 6 months after this amendment had gone into effect, the process for amending this condition would be bringing all those cases back for another amendment. So we would have to have an amendment to the master plan, amendment to the general plan, and amendment to the rezoning, just in order to address this one condition.
Well, I'm not sure we've ever gone to that extent to deal with an issue like this. I know that the dust issue really didn't surface until the projects had already started, and then they came up with different ways of dealing with that, and they didn't have to come back here to get our approval to deal with the dust. They just dealt with it appropriately. So if something happens and there's better ways of dealing with the dust in a year from now, why wouldn't we allow them to incorporate that instead of having to come back for an amendment to try to do that?
Councilor Vimmer, members of the council, that is the primary concern about the way this specific condition is crafted. It doesn't give staff the flexibility. It doesn't address alternative means. It doesn't talk about best practices or being able to take advantage of improvements that are made in the industry in terms of tackifiers or other alternatives. So that, again, is it's written so tightly. And then there's concern about retroactivity, and then just the scope of the applicability.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Councilor Villarreal.
Mr. Mayor, just a clarification. I thought that particular condition of approval was created at the Planning Commission and was accepted by the clients.
Councilor Villarreal, it was, and there was a question, should this go back to the Planning Commission? Well, I just wanted to remind everybody we're a preliminary plat. We have to go back to the Planning Commission for final plat. So whatever the council would adopt on condition number 1 would go back to the Planning Commission.
I guess my point is that it was already vetted then, and staff had that window of time to look at it then before it came to us. And then there was another layer of checking if it made sense, a condition. So I'm curious why you all didn't bring it back or bring up the issue then to the city staff about how would we enforce this, what's this going to look like, instead of going through the process and then we approve it and then here we are again trying to figure out how to backtrack. So
the answer is that we just didn't look at it carefully enough. And then, you know, because we were proceeding forward to record everything and move forward. And looking at that condition, there is concerns on the part of the attorneys, the Skarsgård attorneys, that really was going to be almost impossible to actually implement.
Right. Yeah, I understand that. I was just trying to figure out why we didn't pick it up, whether it was staff.
Well, you have to realize there was a significant movement and staff taking place during that time.
It is, but at the same time, that condition was pretty detailed. It was probably the longest condition that I've ever seen in some of the development. So I guess I just thought we had vetted it pretty thoroughly, or someone looked at it. And so now I feel like either way, we still have to bring it through the process, whether we rescind it or try to do an amendment. So isn't it the same process? We're still going to have to hear it again, all 3 pieces of this development.
Well, Mayor, I was going to ask that question. It seems like there was 2 ways of handling that. One is a rescission, and one is just a reconsideration of the amendment itself. And let me explain that if it's a rescission, then as of October 31, the clock starts over again. You know, we have a month for findings of fact, and then we have another 30 days for appeal. So I guess I'd request if you have that alternative, if it could be considered simply an amendment, a consideration of the one of the conditions rather than a rescission of zoning. And it seems to me, in my practice here for the last 30 years, that it has been handled that way. You could come back strictly for the reconsideration of the condition.
On that point, if I might, Robert's Rules does speak to an alternative to the motion to rescind, which generally is as to an entire action, but that more appropriately we might be speaking of a motion to amend something previously adopted, and that is a more focused to amend something previously adopted is the motion that can be used if it is desired to change only a part of the text or to substitute a different version. And I think the notice certainly indicates that that is the nature of the motion that was presented here tonight, because it does specifically refer to further consideration with respect to condition of approval number 1 pertaining to stabilization of disturbed soil. So a motion to amend something previously adopted as with regards to that particular item set forth in the notice, I think, does not change the nature of the notice in any manner sufficient such that there would be a violation of the Open Meetings Act, but it would allow us to focus on that particular provision without having to revisit the entirety of potentially of the rescission. So,
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Ives, I think the concern there, and maybe we can resolve it, is that it seems to assume that you know how you're going to amend something so that the notice can reflect that. And in this case, we don't have a proposed substitute for that condition. And there's a question about how to notice what the amendment would be.
and I can't read that fast in Robert's rules.
And Mr. Mayor, Councilor Ives, it's not entirely clear, honestly. There is a suggestion that a 2/3 vote is appropriate if you don't have the substance of the amendment noticed. So I would suggest that we at least have a supermajority if we go that direction.
Councilor Vihil-Coppler, did you just raise your hand? You're going to solve this problem for us? You did not.
And Mr. Mayor, Councilor Ives, if we...
Councilor Harris does.
Actually, I was going to buy a little time for Councilor Ives and our city attorney, just to provide a little background. And it really has to do with the complexity of the whole issue. You know, I started work on this probably a little over a year ago. I certainly worked with staff, primarily Dan Escabel in our land use department. I also, and then Rick Word, formerly in our city attorney's office. And this, you know, obviously came about primarily as a result of the summer before last, the spring before last, conditions there at Los Solares. You know, so, and we know too, those of us who are on the Public Works Committee, that the draft stormwater management strategic plan deals with not only sediment and stormwater, but also speaks somewhat to fugitive dust as well. So that, you know, the issues are really complex. The negotiations that Councilor Rivera cited really came about because we were unable to resolve what would be appropriate for our ordinance. We looked at the city of Albuquerque. It was so convoluted, it was hard to really support it. The city of Las Cruces is much more direct, and a version of that is what I sent to Mr. Siebert several months ago, well before this case. But the negotiations for Phase 2B of Pulte's development really occurred this late winter, early spring of this year to try and come up with best practices, and it was more than just tackifier. It had to do with building walls around the perimeter initially. That actually does quite a bit because the fugitive dust starts low and from that specific site and basically traps it. Also, there's a lot of other measures that we incorporated that, for the most part, on Phase 2B seemed to work pretty well, and we actually, I will say that we had somewhat better conditions, but every spring, every summer we have wind, and so things just worked a little bit better. So it's a complex issue. I probably didn't pay as much attention as I should have to the condition. I read through it and didn't necessarily think through it. My take at the time was that it was better than what we'd had in the past. I think that was the intent. But clearly it's less than perfect. In fact, it's probably not very workable according to what we hear from Director Johnson as well as Mr. Siebert. And I think whether we rescind as proposed or if we can do, if we can take the steps where we only look at that particular condition, I think that's what we're going to have to do.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I don't know if this is for Councilor Ives or for Ms. McSherry, but could we make a motion with respect to condition of approval number 1 pertaining to stabilization of disturbed soil with the direction or authority to have staff negotiate with the applicant and bring those changes back when we accept the findings of fact and conclusions of law?
So, Mr. Mayor, Councilor Rivera, I think to update on the prior conversation to maybe provide some additional context, I did just speak with Director Johnson and City Clerk, and I think since the ordinances were not published, so they did not become final, so I guess we did stop that process early enough that we could consider this probably a motion to reconsider because the action did not become final yet. So that, I think, would address part of what you just asked, Councilor Rivera. And so that we could have a motion to reconsider that condition. Hopefully that helps. But then on the second part, I think that's fine.
Would we have to have another meeting, or could we just accept it at the same time as we do the findings of fact and conclusions of law?
So as to that particular condition, you might have additional findings and conclusions. If you're going to change it, I would anticipate you probably would.
Okay.
Okay. Did that clarify things, Counselor?
I already forgot my question.
And I certainly enjoy working out these arcane matters like this, and I appreciate everybody applying themselves with great calm and an effort. Have we arrived at, are we anywhere in the neighborhood of a motion? Would you like to make a motion, Councilor Ives? Yes, I would. Oh, I'm all a twit.
Thank you. With regards to item 12A, I would move to reconsider case number 2018-50 with directions to staff to prepare findings and conclusions that address or propose a resolution with regards to, or appropriate language for approval of condition number 1, which relates to stabilization of disturbed soil.
Counselor, I believe you're going to have to add case number 48 and 49 as well, not just 50.
I would add those to the motion.
Councilor Rivera?
Let's make sure you did that. Work with what your answer was regarding the findings of fact and conclusions of law?
Councilor Rivera, I believe that would address the findings of fact for everything other than that consideration. Is that what the intent is, Councilor Ives?
The reconsideration is of our action, but focusing on with respect to condition of approval number 1 pertaining to stabilization of disturbed soil, and simply asking that a proposed findings and conclusions be returned for further consideration and deliberation by this body at the meeting of October 31st.
Okay. I think I understand the motion, but I'm not sure I understand the question.
So findings of fact and conclusions of law 30 days after approval, which for this project already happened. Now do we have to have 30 days after we reconsider the motion that was just brought up?
So, Mayor Weber, Councilor Rivera, 30 days hasn't passed since the September 12th meeting yet. And you're not adopting the findings in fact tonight. So 30 days from whenever those come, those would become final. But as to the condition, I'm not sure you haven't acted on it yet because it hasn't been in front of you.
Right. So is it 30 days from whenever those come up?
Director Johnson, you have some answer to Councilor Rivera's question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilor Rivera, and members of the governing body. There is not a requirement that we wait 30 days to adopt the findings of fact and conclusion of law. If we review those that were prepared and that you acted on previously, after we can come to agreement with the applicant about modification of this condition, we may not need to modify them because we may not be making a substantive change. However, if we do need to make a substantive change, we could bring that forward at the same meeting, advertise it so that it gives you the ability to act on both or neither. And then we wouldn't have that additional delay.
But what would that do to the appeal process then?
It would then start the appeal. If you do take action on October 31st, it would start the appeal, the 30-day appeal period on that day. But it wouldn't put it out another 30 days or another, several weeks until we brought the findings of fact back at a separate meeting.
Thank you.
So are we, I'm sorry, yeah.
I just want to make sure we're talking about that. I don't know that we listed all three cases, 2018-50, 2018-48, and 2018-49. Just want to be clear that all three are in your motion.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, have we exhausted the subject? All right, in that case, would you please call the roll?
Thank you. I'm sorry, who was the second? Councilor Lindell, thank you. Councilor Rivera?
Yes.
Councilor Romero-Worth?
Yes.
Councilor Vihel-Coppler?
Yes.
Councilor Villarreal?
Yes.
Councilor Beta?
It shouldn't be this complicated, but yes.
Councilor Harris? Yes. Councilor Ives?
Yes.
Councilor Lindell? Mayor Weber?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
All right, and if I understood your motion correctly, it covers item B as well.
B was dependent upon passing 12A, so I do not believe we need to take up item B.
We do not, or we still need to do item B? Yes. Okay. So
sorry about that. Yes.
So is there a motion regarding item 12B?
I would move to schedule a public hearing regarding the above Los Solares cases for October 31st, 2018.
You might want to add regarding the condition of approval number 1 pertaining to stabilization
Further
of disturbed
consideration
soil.
with respect to condition of approval number 1 pertaining to stabilization of disturbed soil.
Okay, that covers what we were concerned about. All right. In that case, would you please call the roll?
You bet. Councilor Romero-Worth?
Yes.
Councilor Vihel-Coppler?
Yes.
Councilor Villarreal?
Yes.
Councilor Beta?
Yes.
Councilor Harris? Yes. Councilor Ives?
Yes.
Councilor Lindell? Yes. Councilor Rivera? Mayor Weber?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion is
Thank you. Thank you to everybody's help in guiding us through that. Appreciate it. Matters from the city manager. Do you have any matters?
Mayor, councilors, I don't this evening.
Are there any matters from the city attorney?
Mr. Mayor, councilors, no.
Are there any matters from the city clerk?
I have none. Thank you.
All right. Are there communications from the governing body? I'm looking at Councilor Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am introducing a resolution endorsing the vision statement of the Airport Advisory Board for the Santa Fe Regional Airport. And also, in keeping with Councilor Rivera's practice, which I generally appreciate, on a personal note, I want to say that Jeff Harris and Erin Rayburn were married this past Saturday. It was a glorious day. Everybody behaved themselves and had a great time.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's wonderful.
I did, barely.
Not only were they married, but you survived, Counselor. Other communications. I'm looking at Councilor Vihel-Coppler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am going to introduce a resolution in support of the installation and maintenance of bicycle safety signage in the city.
Thank you. Councillor Ives.
I join as a co-sponsor of the item just introduced by Councillor Vigil Koppler, and in keeping on the theme of our children's marriages, I would wish happy anniversary to my daughter Sarah and her husband Dylan. Today is the anniversary of their wedding day.
Congratulations. Councillor Ramirez-Worth, anything for the good of the order?
I would just like to call attention to the fact that we all should be aware that we are coming into the election season in earnest, and the amendment, the resolution that we passed to ask for an amendment to our charter will be on the ballot, and I look forward to working with staff on educating the public on that, and also hope that the councilors, as you're talking to people, will also remind people of that ballot question that we worked so hard on.
Very good, thank you. Nobody got married? All right. Councillor Lindell, enlighten us.
Yeah, I'll just say and ask that might be a little premature, but my mother turns 101 on Friday, and maybe everybody would keep her in their thoughts on Friday and wish her a happy birthday. You know, last year the century mark, and now 101. And when asked, how's life going, she told me, it's taken forever. So she maintains a terrific sense of humor.
And the apple does not fall from the tree. Councillor Villarreal, we'll just go down the line.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to announce the last two Southside summer events, even though we're not in the summer anymore. There'll be a film on Friday night starting at 6, I believe, and the film is Up, I believe. And so please bring your families to, I believe we'll have some good weather, hopefully that night. And then on Sunday, there's a Pozolale event, which is a pozole cook-off competition. So if you think you have the best pozole, you better compete. And I believe that starts at noon, but if you want more information about how to participate in the competition, you should go to Earth Care's website, and they'll have details about that. Or it's on Facebook as well, but it's called Pozolale. So hopefully all of you who think you have some good cooking skills can participate. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to ask the city manager again. I think this is probably my fourth request, maybe more, for the class and comp study. The public's paid for it, and they deserve to see it, as well as all of us, the employees. We've all been waiting for it, and I'm still not sure what's taking so long, but would love to see it soon.
Noted.
Councilor Abeyta.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to announce that there's going to be a park cleanup at Swan Park on Saturday at 8 in the morning. So everybody in the Tierra Contenta area and South Side is welcome to come and help us clean up our park. And actually the Boys and Girls Clubs have adopted the park, and so we will start the cleanup on Friday, and then the residents will assist on Saturday. So thank you, Mayor.
Beautiful, thank you. Councilor Vigil-Koppler, did you have anything else that you wanted to add, now that we're doing things more that go beyond your things you're introducing?
Well, sure. I don't believe we're meeting again before the breast cancer walk, which is October 6th. And as a survivor of breast cancer, I'm very interested in this event. And I look forward to getting together with everybody. And I'm glad this is still a an item of interest for most people, but I'm very sorry and sad that it still is. But at any rate, I hope that anyone who's interested in attending meets at the Via Linda Park and you'll see different things over there.
Great.
And you don't necessarily have to wear pink, but real men wear pink. Thank you.
Thank you. A couple quick items. I'm introducing a resolution establishing the city's legislative priorities for the legislative session. It's intended to get the process going. It's very much in draft form. Please take a look at it, and let's get it moving so we can get it into the shape we need it to be in for the upcoming session, which promises to be really important and significant for the city's well-being going forward. So don't mistake this as a finished piece of work. I hasten to make sure we all understand this is purely a way to get the game going so we can all contribute. Also, just for the good of the order, I had the great pleasure of attending a naturalization process where more than 200 Santa Feans became citizens of the United States of America from, I think, more than 40 countries around the world. And if you want to put a smile on your face and feel incredibly good about our country, our city, our state, the people who live here, next year I invite everybody to attend that event. It's heartwarming, it is joyful, it is wonderfully uplifting. And I came away grinning from ear to ear to see those newly minted citizens waving their flags in unison at the end of the event. It was just a very beautiful, beautiful morning ceremony.
Mr. Mayor, I just forgot to add, the Pozolare event is at Cesar Chavez Elementary School from noon to 5, and the film is at Swan Park.
Right.
Thank you.
And thank you for mentioning the Southside Summer. I think it's been a remarkable first year. A tip of the hat to the people who made it work. They started with a blank sheet of paper with no budget, with no plan, and they created a truly wonderful series of options of music and film and food and festivities on the South Side. And I'm hoping now, as the summer ends, we'll get a report to the whole council on just what happened and how many people attended. But I do believe it was a remarkable achievement, and we should all be very happy about it. Whatever district we're in, it was a great thing to put on.
Okay, another clarification. Can you state what that is?
Yeah, the movie is actually at Romero Park on Friday, September 28th.
Right.
I
think
believe
we
that's
need-
the park near the Nancy Rodriguez Center in Agua Fria.
That may require a motion to reconsider, rescind. And on that note, we will adjourn until 7 o'clock.
Thank you.
Well, there is no public hearing. That could help. That other one. You've been at it a long time now. How many years? Right? How many years have you been doing it? I started in 1980. Yeah, I remember pieces before when I was at the planning. I remember. That is, and you still look young. Good. How about yourself? I'm doing well, thank you. It's nice to see a familiar face all the time. All the time. Get out of the way here.
We got to do petitions. Okay. So let's go. Please come to order. We're going to, we got some work to do tonight. I'm going to start with petitions from the floor, unless somebody tells me I'm out of order. Is that the correct procedure? All right, petitions from the floor. We open the mic for 2 minutes. If you are here to talk about the item number H2, that public hearing has been closed, so petitions from the floor on that matter are not appropriate. But if there are other items you wish to speak to and you're here to talk about from the floor, now is the time to please line up, and we'll hear your petition for 2 minutes. Please.
Mr. Mayor, ladies and gentlemen of the council, my name is Kamaju Tadfo, and I am Artistic Director of Africa Santa Fe, a local non-profit organization with a mission to authentically preserve, present, and exchange traditional and contemporary cultures of Africa in a diversified and global world. For the past 8 years, we've been fulfilling this mission of exchanging culture by presenting an authentic African festival here in Santa Fe at the Santa Fe Rail Yard Park, which we've done every year now for 8 years. And I'm actually not a stranger to this room. Ah, thank you. Yeah. I'm actually not a stranger to this room. In 2014, a declaration was made of Fiesta Fela Day. So the name of our festival is called Fiesta Fela. And in our effort to bring the world together through culture and bring the world together into friendship, we present this culture of authentic African art here in the city. Actually, I don't want to talk much because I don't really have time, but our mission here today is just to invite you, Mr. Mayor, the entire council, and the city of Santa Fe to come out to the Santa Fe Rail Yard Park on Saturday, October 13th, Saturday, October 13th. 13th, please. Saturday, October 13th. No, that is, sorry, that was just a sample I gave, sorry. Saturday, October 13th. This year, Saturday is on October, anyway, sorry. To celebrate with us, to share culture, and to, you know, just be one with the world, and to know that there are actually African citizens of Santa Fe living here and want to share with you. And particularly this year with the new captain in the ship, you know, we thought it would be a good time to come and present ourselves and show you that we also live here in Santa Fe and we're part of this community and we're happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I've got some better flyers. I don't know if I can bring some to you. Or?
Ask him, okay. If you give them to our nice city clerk, she will be your flyer distributor.
Turn it off? I pressed on the, I pressed it again. I turned, let me do this. There it is. There we go. I think it'll come on now.
The bigger part? Oh, that.
I don't know what I did. Excuse me.
Yeah, it's still turning on.
Okay. Sorry, it's taking a little bit of time.
Mayor Weber, city councilors, My name is Joanne Ward. I live in the South Capitol neighborhood at 1015 Don Diego. I'm here to request that the city review and reconsider all city decisions that have been made in connection to permitting and construction of an addition to a home at 1008 Don Cubrero. The neighbors who are affected by this construction are concerned about whether operational protocols and whether this building complies with all relevant codes. In particular, we're concerned about the extension into the alley and right-of-way, the building height exceeding the 13-foot limit, ground to top, its location within 1.5 inches of the property line, the addition of approximately 1.5 to 2 feet of rock and soil at the rear of the lot, and what drainage system has been installed to ensure no impact on the properties that are now below that construction, P&M and other utility vehicles, access for maintenance and fire safety, and finally the fact that the adjoining property owners were not notified of this atypical construction in our neighborhood, and that the former city manager approved this construction on behalf of adjoining neighbors. Decisions were made about this construction before some current land use personnel were hired. I'm pleased that current director, Ms. Carol Johnson, has agreed to hold a meeting with interest neighbors to review the facts. This morning's New Mexican featured a front page article about a proposed change to the Galleria building on the plaza. The article reports that the request was denied because it would affect the integrity of the aesthetics of the plaza. I believe that the integrity of every neighborhood in this city is important, not just for tourists, but for people who live here year-round. I ask that the Board of Adjustment address our issues in a hearing and that our questions be answered. It can be difficult and even embarrassing to reverse decisions, but it is even more serious to compromise the confidence that citizens have in code enforcement, due process, and government transparency. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to add to Ms. Ward's statement here. I'm sorry, Stephanie Beninato, P.O. Box 1601, Santa Fe, New Mexico. I, too, live on this alley, and the two neighbors who went in to begin with were told that there was no problem with this construction, that nothing was wrong. But then I asked some questions, and we were told a variance was given without any notice to anybody. Then we were told, and again, I don't have a lot of time, so let me just cut to the chase. The bottom line is that this permit is void because, like the raises that the city manager, Brian Snyder, wanted to give to certain employees that he wasn't entitled to give, he is also not entitled to subject the city to burden the city's alley with a restrictive easement. That has to be done by the city council. So I am asking tonight, that you, mayor, or somebody, the city council, because any of you can do this under the ordinance, that you direct either the city attorney or the city land use director, either of which you can do, to suspend this permit until we work this out. Because again, what happened is the architect who says he's going to comply with all setbacks, he understands them all, he comes in, he asks for an attached addition. A week later, he comes in and he asks for an accessory unit, which requires a 10-foot setback. These are the plans. These show an attached unit. Excuse me, I have to look at it with my glasses. So, whoops, this is the addition. This is the main house, and they are attached. And on the other side here, it is right up to the alley. And this sworn statement by Brian Snyder and the owner says that the owner will set back 3 feet. And the accessory unit requires a 10-foot separation between the original structure and the addition. I'm sorry, I'm dyslexic. The original structure and the addition. That hasn't happened. And again, Mr. Snyder has no authority to grant an easement, and that's what this says. We are agreeing, and I'll just read it to you because this is very serious. It's not only due process, equal protection, because no one else is going to get to do this.
Okay.
But this is void. And it says, let me just read it, Mayor. I'm sorry to go over a few minutes, but I think it's really important that we understand that as a result, any building, so the city has agreed to this setback because the neighbor has to agree to the setback and actually set their property back more. We understand that as a result, any building constructed on our property must be set back at least 7 feet from that property line in order to meet the combined setback building requirements. Again, Mr. Snyder was the city manager. He did not have the authority. This permit is absolutely void. It's not erroneous. It is void, and I'm asking you to suspend it till we actually get to sit down with the owners and work something out.
Thank you.
And too many mistakes to be an error. It was a pass by somebody.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak during the petitions from the floor? Okay. We have some appointments to make, and perhaps the city clerk would walk us through the appointments, and we have to, excuse me, I'm sorry, vote on each one.
Correct. The first committee is the Immigration Committee, and we have Ivan J. Cornejo. That'll be to fill the unexpired term ending 2 of 2020. We'll take a motion.
I move to approve.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Not voting. The appointment passes. Next.
Thank you. Mayor's Youth Advisory Board, Jaden Madrid from St. Mike's High School. He is a change of position as well as a reappointment. His term would end 12 of 2019. Summer Armijo Rotuno, Santa Fe High School, to fill an expired term 12 of 2019. Avi Pope, ATC, fill an expired term ending 12 of 2019. Triana Reed is with the Institute of American Indian Arts to fill the unexpired term ending 12 of 2018.
I move to approve.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Not voting. Measure passes.
Thank you. Human Services Committee, Jesse Cirolia, sorry, to fill the unexpired term ending 3 of 2020.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Not voting. The appointment passes. And finally,
Thank you. Mayor's Committee on Disability, Victor Hughes to fill the unexpired term ending 1 of 2019, and Hope Reed to fill the unexpired term ending 1 of 2019.
is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Okay. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Not voting. The appointment's passed. Thank you very much. We will now take up item H on our public hearings,
Yes.
which is a, well,
Oh, go
clerk,
ahead.
you tell us what they are.
You bet. Mayor and councilors, this is a request coming to you from Rising Stars in the Southwest, and it is for a waiver of the 300-foot location restriction to allow for the dispensing and consumption of alcohol. This would be for the Reaching for the Stars fundraising event, which will be held at the Santa Fe Higher Education Center on Saturday, October 6th, and it would have alcohol service from 5 to 8 p.m. The Santa Fe Higher Education Center is a community of schools that includes New Mexico Highlands University, Northern New Mexico College, the University of UNM, of New Mexico, excuse me, and Santa Fe Community College. There is a letter of no opposition from Rebecca Estrada. She is the Executive Director of the Santa Fe Higher Education Center.
All right. This is a public hearing. Is there someone who wishes to be heard on this matter? Hearing is now over.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All right. Please call the roll.
Yes, Councilor Vihil Coppler?
Yes.
Councilor Villarreal?
Yes.
Councilor Beta?
Yes.
Councilor Harris? Councilor Ives?
Yes.
Councilor Lindell?
Yes.
Councilor Rivera? Yes. Councilor Romero Worth?
Yes.
Mayor Weber?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez.
Thank you for being here. Now we move to item H2. And we return to case number 2017-123. And first, since we have done this before, it's worth remembering that there are to be no ex parte. We are now moving into a different role. We are now in a quasi-judicial process. Are there any disclosures since that hearing that anyone needs to disclose? Yes, Counselor.
I have received several emails and one hand-delivered note, which I have forwarded to the city attorney's office for response, and I did not read any of those emails.
Thank you. Others? Anyone? Yes, Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Mayor. I did receive emails. I forwarded them to the city attorney's office.
Councilor Villarreal.
Mr. Mayor, I received a letter in the mail, and I assumed you had it, so I didn't read it. Thank you.
Okay, it's good. It's good to get this on the record. Yes, Councilor Vigil Koppler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I received one email, and I received a letter in the mail, which I didn't read, and it is on my kitchen countertop. Thank you.
Thank you for the specificity of that. All right. That's
Mr. Evans.
I'm sorry, Councilor
please
Ives.
Note similar communications, but nothing that would impact anything that it would affect my decision here tonight.
Good. Appreciate it.
Same here, Mayor.
Okay. I think this is important to follow the process. Let me just set the stage for, I think, where we are. And the procedural situation is that we have closed the hearing. On August 29th, we completed the public hearing part of the appeal, and we began a deliberation process that led to a motion being adopted to encourage the two parties to come to an agreement, which is why we carried it over till tonight. So let me start very simply by asking, have the parties come to an agreement or agreements? Anybody wish to enlighten us on any agreements, and if there are agreements, are they in writing? Who would like to speak to my question? Please.
Ernie Romero, P.O. Box 22865, Santa Fe. Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, I'm trying to address your question. There is no written agreement signed by the parties, but I'm here to tell you what we undertook, what the process was, what I think the results are, if you like.
Well, what I'd really like to know is if there are no agreements, the process is not important. We just need to know, is it a yes or no agreement?
Then it's no.
No. Thank you. That answers that question. In which case, we are now back directly into the deliberations of the governing body, and I think at this point we can entertain a motion. We can move forward with our considerations of the matter in front of us.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I move to deny the appeal in case number 2017-123. I find that the Planning Commission acted in accordance with law and that there was substantial evidence to approve the preliminary subdivision plat application.
I'll second the motion.
I don't know. Can we entertain points of order from the floor?
I'm one of the appellants. And the question is...
But the hearing is closed.
Hearing is closed. This goes to the motion. The appeal was based on two different sets of facts. One was the open meetings violation, and the other had to do with the land use issues. The question is whether you need to address those separately or together, and whichever you do, you have to be very explicit about.
Thank you. I believe that the motion covers the matters that were in front of us in addressing the appeal on all facets, unless the city attorney has a different interpretation.
Mr. Mayor, I think that's appropriate to consider this to address the entire appeal.
Thank you. So we have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a second. All right.
Discussion.
Is there discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had questions on the proposal that had to do with some staff clarification as it pertains to the escarpment ordinance, and I'm wondering how to proceed to ask my questions of staff before we take a vote.
Unfortunately, what I've been told is that that would require us to reopen the entire hearing process to invite staff to answer those questions at this point.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Villarreal, that is correct. So we would have to go back into the public hearing to allow questions to staff.
The public hearing.
We'd have to reopen, we'd have to stop the deliberation, go backward to reopen the public hearing part.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Villarreal, is defined in our resolution number 2011-24, the process. The public hearings closed after questions to staff. And so if we were going to go back to questions to staff, we would have to go back into the public hearing, which would require comment by both parties on any statements made by staff.
Well, I don't think that that's really the right process. If we have questions that we have to address it during the public hearing, that's a public hearing. That's not the time that we typically ask questions. So how do you address this now? Because I have questions.
So, Mr. Mayor, Councilor Villarreal, if the body does want to go back into public hearing, you could vote to do so. So the way that it's defined in this particular process for this appeal, typically I know that we separate them out, but the way it's outlined here is that the public hearing includes questions by staff, questions by council members to staff, and then the parties get the opportunity to do a closing statement after that.
With time limits.
Correct, with time limits. Yeah, any reasonable time may be imposed.
Well, I don't know if I have to make another motion to go back into public hearing to ask questions, or...
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Villarreal, yes, that would be required. But there's a motion pending, right?
So we have to wait till that one, which is basically either going to end or not, this process.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Villarreal, that's correct. You could move to amend the main motion. Otherwise, I think the main motion's on the floor for discussion.
I don't think this was a very clear process for us. And I did have some questions for staff. So I don't know the best way to amend the motion to first have an ability to ask questions before we make a vote.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Villarreal, are you asking?
Yes.
Okay. So if you wanted to ask questions, this motion would need to either be amended or voted down.
Or withdrawn, correct?
Or withdrawn. It could be friendly amended or amended by vote.
Well, then I'd like to make a friendly amendment to the motion to allow for questions that I have of staff before we make a final vote.
So Mr. Mayor, Councilor Villarreal, whoever made the motion would have to accept or not accept.
Mr. Mayor, I am not in favor of the amended proposed amendment because I'm not in favor of going back into public hearing as well. So I say no.
Well, it has to be her. The primary maker of the motion has to accept the amendment as a friendly amendment. Okay, so we can, according as I understand your answer, we can either proceed with a vote and more discussion previously among ourselves, and or if the measure does not pass, consider reopening the hearing. Councilor Rivera.
Can I just ask a clarifying question of Ms. McSherry? If we open the public hearing, does that just limit it to the applicant and the, I don't know how many appellants there are, but just them, or does
No, just them.
it involve the entire body of people that might want to speak?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Rivera, the council could limit it to just the parties. It does not require anyone other than the parties to be able to comment.
Okay, so I don't know if that changes your decision, Councilor Vigil Copper, on the amendment. It wouldn't be a full public hearing? Okay.
So, Mr. Mayor, I asked my colleagues to consider, so at least I can ask my question. That's the least we could do, to ask questions if we had any follow-up that we didn't get to ask at the last public hearing of staff. It was really staff that I had questions about, and it probably may be quick. So I would ask that you don't vote in the affirmative for the motion made, so that I am allowed to ask questions.
Okay. Is there more discussion of the motion? Councilor Harris?
Well, I think the motion and my second should stand. I think that there was considerable public comment. You know, I look at the packet that we have attached, probably 8 different items. There's been, in my opinion, ample time to ask questions of staff. I know that I did my homework. I kind of had a brief conversation with Director Johnson yesterday. So I think, given the situation, I think that we should be prepared to vote.
Mr. Mayor, on that point, I was told not to talk to staff, and that if I had questions from staff, that I should ask it in the public hearing at this time. So if I got the wrong information, I'm not going to go to staff, which would create ex parte communication possibly if I'm getting different information than all of you from staff. That's why I've decided to take the time to ask it tonight.
Well, I received no such direction. I actually probably talked with Ms. Johnson very briefly yesterday, and as much as anything, I asked if I had questions, more specific questions. Should I speak with Joe Barella in his capacity as the engineer, again, temporary or on contract? Her response to me was that any questions should be addressed to her, as opposed to, for instance, Ms. Zaxis or anybody else. So that was the nature of the conversation. But again, I read through everything, and I didn't have any questions following that brief discussion. It was my understanding that I could direct questions directly to her.
You know,
Mr. Mayor, I got completely different information. So
I'm not sure who spoke to who. What I might suggest, and may not satisfy your concerns, is if you wanted to take the time to tell us what your questions are, I'd be very interested to know what your, without involving staff, why don't you involve the council about your questions so that we can know what your concerns are?
well, it has to do with this escarpment ordinance, but it wouldn't matter if I talked to you all about it because it has to do with staff clarifying something in the ordinance for me. So by telling you all that, it's not going to change the fact that I need clarification.
Okay. Other discussion from the council?
Thank you, Mayor. You know, this is a sizable project. I know that we had a lot of discussion about it, but I don't think all of councilors' questions have been asked. I had questions that I wanted to ask about bonding and warranties and those kinds of things. I don't know, I haven't had discussion specifically with Councilor Villarreal as to what her questions are. And I would like for the two of us or whoever else has questions for the council to give us the courtesy of asking those. So that's the statement that I have about that.
Councilor Beta, you want to weigh in?
I think we just called for the question. Call for the question and see where we land up.
Okay.
Mayor, can I have the motion restated again? I didn't catch the first couple of.
Councilor Rivera, the motion was to deny the appeal in case number 2017-123, and that the Planning Commission acted in accordance with law, and that there was substantial evidence to approve the preliminary subdivision plat application.
Thank you, Councilor.
We have a point from Councilor Ives, who has been pouring through his Robert's Rules of Order.
Once again tonight. So we have a main motion, which is to deny the appeal, and then we have a motion to amend to allow, not to change the main motion, but to, in essence, add to it to allow some limited discussion by way of opening up the public hearing again, correct? Has that been seconded?
My second motion?
Your motion to amend that you made.
It was offered as.
I was offered as a friendly amendment.
Because I think you can make
That's what I thought.
a motion
I could
to
make a
amend,
motion, right?
which would then be subject to consideration by this body, and that has been seconded by Councilor Lindell. And in speaking, sounded like that could be done for a very limited purpose.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Ives,
understanding is-
the motion can be amended, but in this case, if it were to be amended to both approve the Planning Commission's decision and reopen the public hearing, I'm not sure if that's a possible scenario. Because we'd be determining the outcome of the hearing and reopening the hearing. Some other amendment to the motion is possible. I'm not sure that one makes sense.
So if I could add, you could add to the motion that's on the floor conditions to the denial of the appeal, couldn't you?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor, is correct, yes.
Right, and I think it was asked of Councilor Vihil-Coppler that she withdraw her motion so that your Councilor Villarreal's motion could be made. Councilor Vihil-Coppler said she would not withdraw her motion. So the only way to dispense with her motion is to vote on it, and then if it's voted down, then another motion could be made to move back to, if that was the wish of the council, to move back into public hearing. Or if it's not necessary to ask questions, but there are conditions that other councilors want to make, and they are acceptable to the sponsor of the motion, Councilor Vihil-Coppler, that could then happen.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Councilor Ives, as the parliamentarian, we have a call for the question.
Right.
And my understanding is that takes precedence over any discussion we've already had. I may be wrong.
It is a matter of priority under Robert's rules, so I think you are correct in that. Usually they are only made after there has been full discussion, at least in one or two rounds on the particular motion, but we can certainly take it up, and folks would need to determine whether or not the fact that we have not had the discussion is any reason to or not to move forward with the main motion.
Okay.
I would also like clarification that Councilor Abeyta meant to call the question. He said that in a manner to me that suggested it's something we could do, but not that he was actually doing it. So if there could be some clarification there, that'd be great.
I'll call for the question.
Okay. Question has been called. Please call the roll.
Councilor Villarreal?
No.
Councilor Abeyta?
Yes.
Councilor Harris? Yes. Councilor Ives?
No, and I'd like to make a statement at the end of the voting.
Councilor Lindell? No. Councilor Rivera?
No.
Councilor Romero Worth,
No.
Councilor Vihil Coppler,
Yes?
Mayor Weber.
No.
Thank you. Motion for the question has been denied.
Thank you.
Motion fails. So
Mr.
now-
Mr. Mayor, if I might make that
Yeah,
statement briefly. I voted no at this point in time simply because I wanted to be able to consider, at least have this body consider reopening the public hearing for the limited purpose of addressing questions of members of the council to staff, and presumably with a strictly time-limited opportunity for the parties to address the council on the matters relating to the questions asked. So I'm looking at it for a very limited purpose, and for that reason voted no.
Yeah, I take this as a vote of courtesy and consideration to our members, not on the merits of the motion, but on the opportunity for people on the council to ask questions. I do think we need to respect time, and we have a very, to my mind, a process that is not conducive to easy implementation. It is, as you said, a difficult and slightly attenuated process, and it lends itself to lots and lots of procedural questions and difficulties. So I think what we ought to do is proceed quickly and efficiently and in a time-limited manner. Councilor Vihil Coppler?
Mr. Mayor, could you clarify, or the city attorney clarify? I thought we were voting on calling for the question.
I thought we were voting on the motion.
So,
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Vihil Coppler, that's correct. So the call of the question failed. So we still have the main motion pending.
In that case, there was a lack of clarity. I apologize. So we need to vote on the motion so that we can get on to whatever happens next.
Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
So let's vote again, this time with clarity that I'm sorry, Councilor Rivera?
As well. Sorry, since we're not
calling the question yet, we
just
can
yet.
still discuss. Okay.
I want to know if Councilor Vihil Coppler's motion, if we do vote on it and it fails, to give Councilor Villarreal the opportunity to ask additional questions, can that same motion be entertained at a later time?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Rivera, yes, it may.
Thank you.
Thanks for the clarification.
Good. So, yes, you have a question? The question from Councilor Rivera was, if the current motion on the floor fails and we reopen the hearing so that council members may ask their questions, may that same motion be reintroduced without any problems? And the answer to that is yes, unless our parliamentarian has a different answer. You are studying that book, Peter.
Indeed.
Are we okay?
Yes.
All right. So we now have a motion on the floor, which would end the matter. If it is passed, we will have voted on the matter in front of the body. If it does not pass, we are in a position then to entertain a different motion, a motion, for example, to reopen the hearing for the specific express purpose of a limited amount of time spent with council member questions of staff, with a very limited amount of time of each party to respond to staff answers.
Mr. Mayor, point of clarification. So now we are officially voting for Councilor Vihil
Main
Coppler's motion.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Clear? Please call the roll in that case, City Clerk.
Yeah. Councilor Beta?
Yes.
Councilor Harris? Councilor Ives?
No.
Councilor Lindell? No. Councilor Rivera? No. Councilor Romero Worth?
No.
Councilor Vihil Coppler?
yes?
Councilor Villarreal?
No.
Councilor, Mayor Webb?
No. Now, is there another motion?
I'd like to move to reopen the public hearing in order for councilors to ask questions of staff with limited time from the appellants if needed, and as well as other Was there anything else I'm missing on there? I'm looking at Councilor Eyes. Okay.
I think just with opportunity for the parties
to respond.
Only to respond.
Only the parties in a limited amount of time.
Thank you.
Provide
clarification.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Villarreal, do you want to set that period of time now, or do you want to set it on each question?
How much time do you think we should allow for the appellant and/or applicant to respond if they need it? 3 minutes? What do you want to offer?
I think 3 minutes is sufficient. Our staff may have a little bit longer time. But
very good. And are there any, before we vote, I want to ask one question of City Council, or City Attorney. Are there limits to the kinds of questions that are allowed to be covered in this kind of a quasi-judicial hearing?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Villarreal, I think anything that's a technical question about the ordinances, anything substantive that's on the record, or I can't imagine something right now. If I hear something, I'll try to interject. But at this point, it seems like anything would be fair game.
Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second. Yes, sir. We're ready? Call the roll.
Councillor Harris? Councillor Ives?
Yes.
Councillor Lindell? Yes. Councillor Rivera? Yes. Councillor Romero Worth?
Yes.
Councillor Vihel Coppler?
No.
Councillor Villarreal?
Yes.
Councillor Beta?
Yes.
Mayor Weber?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Okay, I recognize Councillor Villarreal.
Thank you.
Please ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and for my colleagues for giving me a chance and the respect to ask questions. If we had a clarity in this process, I would have already asked my questions and we would have moved on. So here we are. This is for staff. I don't know who's coming down from land use.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. I guess I've been looking at these maps again of our escarpment and ridgetop renderings, and I guess the question that I keep coming at because I don't know all the ins and outs about the escarpment ordinance is to understand what it says about home sites. And I guess my understanding is that I thought they should be moved as far from the view line as possible, but according to what we have in front of us in the maps that we have of the proposed development, that's not the case. So can you explain that to me further about the escarpment ordinance and how this passes the muster for our requirements for escarpment as it relates to home sites and view lines?
Mayor and Councilor Villarreal, I'll give it a shot. I rely on the Technical Review Division quite a bit and the city engineer on this matter, but I'd have to turn to that section, the overlay section of the code, 14-5, and there is that section that talks about when the lots were subdivided. There's a date after which some of those things do kick in, and let me just turn to that real quick, if you can give me a second here. Structures, it says 14-5.6D, structures shall be sited as far from the view line as possible unless staff approves an alternate siting meeting the following criteria. Let me be really clear on this first, because there is a date in 1992 for all lots subdivided or re-subdivided after February 26, 1992, development in the Ridgetop District of the Escarpment Overlay District other than development in the Ridgetop District of the Escarpment Overlay District other than driveway access and utilities is prohibited. So definitely that's the case. No development in the Ridgetop, and then all structures or parts of structures shall be located inside the approved buildable site as shown on the approved plat. I'm sorry if I read this to you. I really
It's okay.
have to, if no buildable site is indicated on the approved plat, the buildable site shall be approved by staff at time of building permit. Modifications to the buildable site shown on the plat can be made by staff at time of building permit. In all cases, the buildable site shall comply with the section above in the code here, and then the definition of buildable site in 14-12 of this chapter. So then it goes on to say structures shall be sited as far from the view line as possible unless staff approves an alternate siting meeting the following criteria. And there's, let's see, there's the 3 criteria. The alternate siting shall be located within the approvable buildable site, set forth in subsection 2 above, and then in no case shall a structure's alternate siting be permitted in the ridgetop sub-district for a lot subdivided or re-subdivided after 1992. And for lots subdivided or re-subdivided on or before, well, that doesn't apply, so we won't go into that. So it is the siting, the alternate siting shall be located within that approved buildable site. And
Ms. Johnson, did you want to?
I would like to add to that.
Sure, thank you.
Basically, thank you, Councilor Villarreal and members of the council. These are buildable sites, and each building, when it comes in, because we don't have the specific building plans at this point in time, will be reviewed for compliance with the escarpment regulations. And at that time, we will move the buildings to the extent, to the furthest extent possible, away from those view lines, but within the designated buildable area.
So there was a comment, or that you read some section about the driveways versus roadways. And when I look at this, I see access to these homes that are really their driveways versus the road to come in. So you had read something.
Right. Basically, for those lots that are subdivided or re-subdivided after February 26, 1992, development in the Ridgetop District of the Escarpment Overlay District other than driveway access and utilities is prohibited.
So in this case, how do you define driveways for this development plan? Do you see these as driveway? I guess what I'm asking is, they did the review of escarpment, which I'm hoping that all aspects of the ordinance were considered, and to make sure that we're complying with our escarpment ordinance. Because as I look at it now and the way you're reading it, it seems like we're not really. You're saying there's another level of it, but I feel like there's not, from what we are seeing, a true compliance with the escarpment ordinance.
Councilor Villarreal and members of the council, does the question pertain to the difference or the distinction between roads and driveways?
Yes, and maybe you could describe that for me for this, as it pertains to this development.
As staff provided testimony at the previous hearing, it has been staff's practice to interpret that roadways are essentially functionally the same as driveways. I'm not stating an opinion one way or another, but that is how staff has applied the ordinance in the past.
I don't know if I agree with that. A roadway and a driveway are two different things.
If I could just add, there isn't a distinction in the escarpment ordinance, and so that is why staff has made that conclusion. And again, I'm not making, I'm not stating that I, as now the land use director, agree with that interpretation. I'm just saying that that's how staff has applied this ordinance in the past.
Okay. Well, at this point, I don't know if they're required from the parties to respond.
They're allowed.
They're allowed. I don't know if...
At this point, is there a, since we're trying to be scrupulous with the process, I assume you each could have 3 minutes to respond to this question.
That's fine. I think it'd be fair if both sides respond.
You have to be sworn, however.
Yes. Yes. Hi, I'm Richard Folks. I would like to speak to what Mr. Mayor and Councilor Villarreal, what she is asking is a road or a driveway. This is a map of the proposed development. This is Hyde Park Road. This is, these are the ridge tops in dark here. They're clearly being used as roads. Calle Mirasol is a road. The escarpment ordinance prohibits, other than a driveway or utility alignments, the ridges are to be protected, and roads are a clear violation of the ordinance. And in this case, you have 4 on top of plans show 3. Well, it's driveways that are perpendicular to the road are also prohibited, but you show 1, 2, 3, 4 roads on the top of the ridges, which is clearly a violation of the intent of the code. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, applicant, you wish to use your 3 minutes, you need to get sworn.
My name is Jim Siebert, 915 Mercer. I do? You almost forgot it, huh? Councilors, actually, this same question was asked at the last hearing, and my answer was exactly as Mrs. Johnson explained it, that it's always been the practice. And let me explain why. If you take a look at the least visible feature that would be constructed on the land, would be a road, because that's on the ground. It's hidden in most cases by trees and the heavily wooded areas of the escarpment district. So the difference would be that if it were not, a road were not permitted on the ridge, you'd have to slide the road on either side of the ridge. And then, so you would be looking at 2 scars on either side of the ridge, rather than 1 scar that would be the least possible, have the least visibility. So that's that's always been the rationale I've heard for staff stating that that's the policy. Thank you.
Thank you. You have another question?
No, thank you.
Councilor Abeyta, did you have a question or a comment?
No, I was.
Okay. Thank you. Councilor Lindell, you have a question?
I do. This question's for Land Use Director Johnson. I'm looking at an email that comes from legal talking about agreement to construct improvements and financial guarantees. And I don't want to catch you off guard with this. It's having to do with the warranty period for infrastructure improvements. And the land use director, I'm reading from the code, the land use director may extend the warranty period when necessary to ensure that actual or potential defects are corrected. Then we go a little bit further, and it says a time period on it of a year, but that the land use director has complete discretion in how long that warranty period actually is. Now, the conversation here says that the warranty period of a year seems vastly insufficient considering the terrain that we're dealing with here and things that have happened in the past on this terrain, i.e. flooding. And further into the conversation, it does say that 50 years seems excessive, but I'm encouraging you, Land Use Director Johnson, to give us a substantial amount of time in the warranty of all of these improvements, considering what we've seen has happened on that property. So I'm not asking you for a commitment of warranty time right now, but I'm asking you for studied consideration when you make that determination. And I am specifically asking that it be for a much longer period than a year.
Would you like a response?
Sure.
Thank you, Councilor Lindell and members of the governing body. We just had a discussion on this point yesterday with members from the Public Works Department, including Regina Wheeler. Their staff are critical in these discussions because of their experience in the actual construction and maintenance of infrastructure. And it was pointed out that the 1-year time period is a minimum time period, not a maximum. And so it would be based on input from the Public Works Department in terms of just the constructability, whether this is a unique type of infrastructure installation. And so just to your point, all those factors will be taken into consideration when determining what that period should be.
Thank you. Sure, the parties could comment on that.
If you've already been sworn and you care to comment on the question, this would be the moment for either party to use that opportunity. Okay.
I guess no one wants to comment on it.
Not required. Okay, and yet.
Mayor Weber, we did discuss this slightly when we were in mediation, and we had proposed that the developer create a performance bond that the city would hold that would cover any kind of liability during construction, and they did not like that idea.
Thank you. You may have to be, yeah, there you go.
I do. Mayor Weber, members of the City Council, all I can do is promise you that we will continue to work closely with staff. Ernie Romero. Sorry. We'll work closely with city staff and comply with whatever they're required us to do.
Are you done? I think Councilor Harris had a comment.
Councilor Harris, you have a question?
No, I just wanted to expand upon what Councilor Lindell began to address and really give a little background, because 2 weeks ago at the end of our executive session, I had a brief discussion with Ms. McSherry really on this issue, because as you probably remember, a month ago when the matter was before us, I spoke a lot and actually read the language from 1981-3 that deals with performance bond. That night, just as tonight, sitting next to Councilor Ives, we talked quite a bit about it. And then earlier today, I shared with Councilor Ives, because we had this discussion, I've gotten to the point where I believe that, and it goes beyond just the representations of Mr. Romero, which I accept, but in this matter, I think it's important to really see what mechanisms, what tools are in place. So I've shared that email statement from Ms. McSherry with Councilor Ives, and then right before we came back into evening session, Councilor Lindell asked me much the same question, how I was going to approach this, and I just forwarded it to her as we sat down. So that's the nature of this email. It was an answer to a specific question that I made of Ms. McSherry, and I appreciate her response. So how I got to it was kind of the following. Part of it was warranty. I certainly had read the same language that Councilor Lindell read out, and I also want to acknowledge Ms. Johnson's response, and I appreciate the fact that there's already been a discussion with the Public Works Department about what would be appropriate. What I turned to most often was really the covenants that run with the property. And I looked at the maintenance guidelines as they're defined in 1.22. as you know, the guidelines are, and really they're dealing primarily with the centralized, what's called the centralized stormwater facilities, be amended from time to time by the board with the consent or at the direction of the Planning and Land Use Department of the City of Santa Fe regarding the maintenance of the centralized stormwater facilities. So by definition, the city can direct changes to the maintenance guidelines. Goes on in Article 3.3, which is entitled Centralized Stormwater Facilities. I really looked at the language that says the association, you know, and again, so this is where it talks about, and you've heard the language before, that the city has the right but not the obligation regarding these improvements. But it goes on to say, and I thought this was very important, the association shall maintain and keep the centralized stormwater facilities in a good working order and condition and in compliance with all then applicable governmental regulations, or excuse me, governmental requirements, including current and future written directions and requirements from time to time issued by the City of Santa Fe. So there it even strengthens what the city may do currently as well as in the future. This was an important point for me because those of us who sit on the Public Works Committee, we saw a tremendous presentation by the Public Works Department, particularly Melissa McDonald, Leroy Pacheco, and others regarding the Stormwater Management Strategic Plan. We know that there are changes coming to our plan. They're going to be required by EPA. EPA is our partner. We're one of 5 cities around the country in developing a response to the new requirements. And so the requirements are going to change. We know that in terms of the regulatory environment. And the requirements are likely to change because of the climatic conditions that we're going to be looking at. So that was also discussed on Monday night as well, how NOAA and the data they will develop and how FEMA may respond in terms of definitions for 100-year floods and things such as that. So again, this language anticipates that the city can review and direct changes you know, based on current and future conditions. So I thought that was important. Let's see. And then actually, and we know that there's a fairly rigorous inspection protocol that's built into the agreements that requires the HOA to, and we know also that the applicants will control the HOA for a certain amount of time, probably well into past the midway point, I assume, of the development of the subdivision. But annually, a professional engineer will be required to inspect and certify. So there's a lot of language and protections, I feel, within the city or within the covenants that protect not only the city but also, more importantly, the owners of the property and those downhill. And I also rely upon, and this doesn't get to any performance bond, but I rely upon Orlin Guerrero-Ortiz statement that, particularly with the conditions, the additional conditions that she proposed, that the plans will improve the current conditions of the site and reduce the existing active erosion condition. So with the plans that are in place, and they're extensive, and I think there's been a tremendous amount of work on the part of staff and commission and the applicants and the appellants to work through this, and I think we've got really the best solution possible for today's conditions, and I think we have language within the covenants that really anticipate changing conditions, whether they're regulatory or environmental, that should go a long ways, along with the inspection and everything else, go a long ways to protect various parties. So anyways, that's how I've gotten to the point where I did not believe that a performance bond was appropriate. and necessary.
Got it.
Anyways, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Counselor. Are there other questions before we close the public hearing section? Counselor Ives.
I know in my looking through the covenants, I concur in what Councilor Harris has described. They, I think, are pretty robust as these things go in terms of ensuring that there is proper construction, maintenance, and future repair of the stormwater and drainage facilities. The one question I had on warranties was, when does the warranty period begin? And I ask this from the perspective, obviously we have a declarant who's in charge of the property and responsible for these things currently. Eventually the HOA will take that over, the homeowners association as described in the declaration and covenants, but I wasn't sure of the exact timing of when the warranty period begins. Does that not happen until the HOA takes over, until all the pieces are constructed and in place, in which case it might not be until sometime long before the HOA takes over, if you know?
Thank you, Mayor Weber. Councilor Ives, a member of the governing body. It's my understanding that once staff has approved the infrastructure improvements, that's when the warranty period begins.
And do we have any sense when the HOA will take that over?
It depends on how quickly the lots transfer ownership from the developer to the individual property owners.
And so will the developer declarant still be responsible for all these items in terms of repair, maintenance, et cetera, for these stormwater and other drainage facilities until such time as that is transferred to the HOA?
For those items that, excuse me, Mayor Weber, members of the council, and Councilor Ives, for those elements of infrastructure that are private and not to be dedicated to the city, yes, that is true.
So that raises my next question, which is, what does the city propose to take on in terms of infrastructure here? I know there is a provision, section 3.3.6 on page 39 in our packets under the applicant's materials that provides with regards to transfer to the city. What is contemplated that the city would take on under that provision at this point in time?
Thank you, Councilor Ives, Mayor Weber, and members of the governing body. I don't have that page in front of me. It's my understanding that the city would be taking on any infrastructure that's dedicated as public, or that's identified as public. So without having that provision in the plan in front of me, I can't speak to specifics.
Here it does speak to the centralized stormwater facilities as an item that the city might take over along with associated easements if not previously dedicated, and with that would come the responsibility for the inspection, maintenance, repair, construction, and or replacement of same.
Mr. Mayor, can I respond to that particular question?
Yes, and we'll give the other side an opportunity as well.
Yeah, Mr. Johnson really didn't have the opportunity to have the full scope of this project, so I'll answer that one. It's only two things. It's water and it's sewer. All the other infrastructure in the subdivision is private. It will be maintained by the homeowners association.
Water, of course, encompasses many things, not only delivery of potable water service, but also potentially stormwater facilities.
No, it's strictly potable water carried in pipes. I've seen very few instances where the city has taken over responsibility for stormwater ponds or stormwater structures. It doesn't happen.
And the reason I have this confusion is that section in the declaration states, it says, if the city of Santa Fe or its assigns shall expressly agree to accept a dedication by and through the governing body of the city of Santa Fe or its assigns of the centralized stormwater facilities, then that would happen. So I agree that that would be conditioned on action by this governing body, which at least I, for one, am not inclined to seek. So thank you for that clarity, that it is related to the delivery of potable water as well as the removal of sewage.
Does the appellant wish to speak to that question? You need to be sworn.
My name is Sue Herman. I'm a resident of 1305 Calle Ramon. You're here in Santa Fe. And Mayor, Mr. Mayor, thank you for the opportunity. Councilors, thank you. Once again, I bring you back to the statement of Mr. Siebert at the early neighborhood notification meeting that what's happening here is that we're relying on the homeowners association, and this was a quote from Mr. Siebert, to the extent that it exists. And this body, I don't know that there is no requirement in those covenants that a homeowners association exists. And we all know that in this situation, that side of town, all those subdivisions up along Hyde Park Road, 800, 1000, 1200 East, the occupancy rate is hangs right around 30%. Our point is, where are the people going to be who are going to run this homeowners association and take it over after Mr. Romero is gone? And that's one of the things that's really been a sticking point for us. There is no requirement that exists. So
thank you.
I think you're looking at maybe taking over some infrastructure here that you may not want.
Thank you. Councilor Ives, do you have any other questions?
Well, it sounds like we're only taking over infrastructure that presumably we do want, because delivery of potable water by the service is through our water company, and of course we have our wastewater system as well. So I don't think we do have a capacity under the declaration to come in and make repairs, not the potential but not the obligation to do so if we want to. So this would fall upon the homeowners association. I apologize, and I would ask a question of the developer here so question for Carol, at what point does the HOA take over here?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilor Ives, member of the governing body. It's at that point where the homeowners become a majority ownership in the development, not the developer.
And up until that point in time, does the developer retain responsibility for the maintenance and repair of all the infrastructure and drainage and stormwater facilities, other than those two items dedicated to the city of Santa Fe?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Now we can have a response by both of our sides.
Mayor Weber, council members, I'd like to add something to muddy the water here a little bit. I'm sorry, but there is no approved master plan for this development. There is no approved master plan or development plan. That's very important to keep in mind. Also, there is no exact unit count. They're proposing 49 units, but there are...
Mr. Mayor, I see you raising your eyebrows at me. I'm not sure if this is responsive to what Ms. Johnson just responded to, and the council has limited testimony.
We're really trying to keep this to the questions asked. This is not opening new testimony, new lines of argument, or even reopening old lines of argument. Trying to be fair and give everybody a chance to respond to the specific questions for which this specific period of hearing was open. So
okay.
I understand your desire, but let's try to strictly interpret what we're doing here. Thank you.
Mackwith, 100 LaSalle Circle, Santa Fe, New Mexico. Mr. Mayor, Councilor Ives, pursuant to the terms of the declaration, the developer is responsible for the stormwater systems during the warranty period, pursuant to section 3.3.1 of the proposed declaration. Right now, we do mention a one-year period. If that warranty period was extended, then the declarant would be responsible for the structures during that period. The declaration in that same section specifically provides for the association to take over responsibility for the maintenance, repair, replacement of the facilities once that warranty period has expired. And contrary to Ms. Herman's statement, the declaration expressly requires the formation and continuation of the association.
Thank you. Okay, Peter?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that there's no gap in any way, shape, or form where those issues would not be covered.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Rivera?
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. So I think the big concern here is really the flooding issues, which many of these neighbors have already been having to deal with for many years, and the city approves things like this, and then 20 years from now we're all gone, city staff is all gone, but the residents remain. And that becomes a big problem, because then they're dealt with a 100-year flood, and they have damage that they warned us about and we never dealt with. So according to Mr. Romero, he said that they'll comply with whatever the city can do with regards to dealing with the flooding. How much can we do?
Thank you for the question, Councilor Rivera, Mayor Weber, and members of the governing body. That's a very open-ended question that's difficult to respond to. One of the reasons the city hired a third-party engineer, Ms. Guerrero-Ortiz, was to add additional layer of eyes, and she provided 16 additional conditions of approval and required upsizing the retention requirements above what our current ordinance requirements are, just in order to provide that additional level of protection. At such point that the city may amend its drainage requirements based on the strategic plan that's going through the adoption process, then we would have the ability to go back to the developer and request that they make any necessary changes in order to comply with those regulations.
I don't know if you can answer this or not, but with the 16 points that Ms. Guerrero-Ortiz added, would that have dealt appropriately with this last 100-year flood that we saw?
Thank you, Councilor Rivera, and Mayor Weber, and members of the governing body. It was her 16 conditions were imposed prior to this most significant storm event on July 23rd. At this point, without doing a specific modeling of that storm event, and the resulting improvements associated with her conditions of approval, that would be difficult to ascertain. As we've heard, that storm event was somewhere between a 600 and 1,000-year storm event. There is very little infrastructure, new infrastructure, that's being designed to that standard, if at all, nationwide, let alone in the city of Santa Fe.
So could we impose those on the applicant if they were willing to abide by them, which I heard they were?
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Rivera, Mayor Weber, and members of the governing body. They would actually have to reverse engineer, take those rainfall amounts, the specific, and I'm not sure what rainfall data we have that's close enough to that site that would provide the level of accuracy necessary. But if that data is available, then they would be able to construct a model and determine whether or not their proposed improvements would have been able to accommodate that storm.
And can that be done before the project is even begun?
We haven't gone through the final plat phase, so it's possible that we could run a storm model during that time. And I think at this point it'd be more appropriate to direct that question to the applicant and/or his engineer.
Okay.
So why don't we give 3 minutes to each side to respond? There's a string of questions there, but I think the nub of the issue, if I'm correct, Councilor, is is there the capacity and the willingness to add to the conditions in some way that they would agree to a reverse engineered process to assess a more severe storm than that which was already planned for? Okay.
My name is Mike Gomez with Santa Fe Engineering, 1599 South St. Francis Drive. And between the last hearing that we had and today, we've gone ahead and modeled the storm. So what you're asking for doesn't need to be reverse modeled. We've already gone and modeled it. We've got precipitation data from about all the gauges in the city of Santa Fe. I have this that I could go ahead and put it under the thing, or I could pass them out. So you could see the levels of precipitation that occurred during that July 23rd event. So we came up with a mapping of the storm. These contours that you see right there are the precipitation numbers. The main area that was hit was near Santa Fe High area, where they got 3.6 inches, I believe. And as you got further to the north, it went way down to like 2 inches, 1 inch, and less than that. Going to the south, it also picked up a lot of the area along I-25. So what we did, and we looked at the incremental amounts of rain that fell that night. That's this table right in here. And this is every 12 minutes, the weather station would go ahead and record how much rain it got. This was at a gauge that was located near the center of the storm. Using this data, we made a distribution. And we moved that storm. Instead of being centered in this area, we centered it right on Estancia del Norte. What we saw is that what we had designed and we over-designed actually would have contained that flood without any overtopping or any damage to any of the structures. This right here, blue is the existing runoff. The brown is with the development in place, and as you can see in there, we've drastically reduced those flows. In the first case right in here, it's down about 50% if you count it as a 2-hour storm, or about 20% if you count it as a 5-hour storm. So we've modeled it, we've routed it through our structures, everything works.
I appreciate that.
Can we get the appellant a chance to respond?
Oh, sure.
Thank you, Mayor Weber, council members. I just have one question for Mr. Gomez, and that is, what is the exact unit count? And what good are the calculations if you don't know the exact unit count? It is not 49. So you can calculate for 49, but if people come in and build accessory units, you have completely different scenario. You have more traffic, you have more runoff, you have more sewage. It doubles or triples. So what is the point of making calculations on a number that is not the exact unit count?
Thank you.
That's my question.
Thank you. Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Mayor. And, you know, I think when all the neighbors that got hit, all the neighborhoods that got hit as hard as they did were constructed, I think they felt like they had designed a pretty good runoff system as well. So, you know, unfortunately, we can't tell on this until we have another big storm, and by then it's too late. And I think that's a problem that we're all having up here. So, well, I am anyway. So, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Are there other questions before we close the public hearing and continue back to our deliberations? Councilor Harris.
I just want to make the comment that granted that we didn't have as significant a storm event on July 23rd as we had in other parts of town, but it was significant. And the applicant had made improvements that I assumed were designed by Mr. Gomez's firm to the property immediately adjacent behind, if you will, El Matador condominiums. And those were done prior to, and that's the adjacent property. The Arroyo, as I understand it, and maybe I'm wrong, is for the most part between this property and, so for instance, the homes on Valley Drive. The immediate adjacent property are those homes accessed off of William Street as well as El Matador. And so we heard testimony a month ago that and an appreciation from El Matador condominiums that in fact the improvements worked. And so I think that that's an important point to note. I also, you know, again in our packet, probably the eighth packet out of the 8, which is the additional materials, page 20 of 53, to me it's very instructive. The upstream drainage area is defined. It's in pink. It shows that it includes approximately 1,200 acres. The site drainage that we're talking about this evening and a little bit beyond, because it would I assume, include the Haciendas del Mirasol, it was 78 acres. So there's no denying that historically there's been a tremendous problem associated with the improvements up along and above, you know, Arroyo de los Piedras. And once again, I'm going to rely upon not only the applicant and the material that was submitted, but also the work of the staff, which I think was commendable, and the Planning Commission and their requirements to go back, or actually making the applicant go back and provide additional, you know, we all saw the RFQ and what they were asking for. They selected a very competent individual in Ms. Guerrero Ortiz, and she did her analysis. I've spoken to it already, as well as the conditions. So again, I just wanted to make that statement. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, I will close the public hearing part that we opened up by that motion, and entertain. We are now back in our deliberations part of the process. Is there a motion at this point for this item?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you. I move to deny the appeal in case number 2017-123. I find that the Planning Commission acted in accordance with law and that there was substantial evidence to approve the preliminary subdivision plat application.
Second.
We can have discussion.
Mr. Mayor, I won't be supporting this tonight because I feel like there's been inconsistencies with application of the escarpment ordinance, and that this issue with the accessory dwelling units being allowed is going to add another layer of complexity that we don't even know what will occur from that. If we keep counting 49 and all 49 units as what is going to be the norm, I don't think that that's really going to be the norm. I think there's too many open doors to allow for other units, and I actually was really disappointed to see the applicants didn't come together to try to find a number that was more appropriate for that area. And I had said this in the other public hearing, that if we applied good planning at the beginning for other developments that have occurred there, then we probably wouldn't be in this situation. So we should be looking at better planning methods as we move forward, since we haven't made good decisions in the past. Thank you.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Thank you. Other discussion? Councillor Ives.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to revisit just a question that was discussed to some degree earlier with regards to an interpretation of the escarpment overlay district. And this had to do with language that spoke to other than driveway access. And I've been concerned about that language because I don't think it is necessarily clear language. It doesn't say other than driveways, for instance, which would be quite clearly then referring specifically to driveways, but it talks about driveway access. And I know it has been the interpretation of land use in at least one other instance of development in the escarpment overlay district that a roadway was allowed to the driveways that served the residences, so presumably providing driveway access. And that is specifically the term that is used twice in the escarpment overlay. So I don't, that doesn't seem like an interpretation that necessarily carries weight, especially in light of the interpretation of that, as I understand it, within the land use office. I was going to ask, and this may be whether or not we could impose a condition, because I think the question about accessory dwelling units is certainly not an inappropriate one, and it might be to impose an additional condition, which I understand is within our parameters here this night based upon everything we have heard and considered. Well, I would make it as a potential friendly amendment to the motion, which is that if additional dwelling units are to be added to any of the lots within the development, the lot owners shall be required to add additional drainage structures to handle stormwater at a level of not less than the primary residence. So suggesting that if you did add an additional dwelling unit, you could not simply rely necessarily on what you had done on the unit, but that you would need to add additional stormwater retention to protect the property to the level that it was protected at when there was simply the single-family residence there. And that, I think, addresses the question of potentially additional dwelling units in a way that, again, ensures that the good work that has been done in providing protection that Mr. Gomez was just speaking of and that Councilor Harris spoke of with regards to the most recent event would be emulated with those additional dwelling units and therefore not pose additional presumably threats to folks downstream or downslope. So I would make that as a friendly amendment to the maker of the motion.
May I ask a question regarding your friendly amendment? So this would put the onus on future homeowners that create accessory dwellings? This would be their financial responsibility?
Yes, and they actually bear that responsibility currently, but only to the existing code. And in this particular instance, we know the developer has designed stormwater in excess of the code such that it was capable of handling, as has been suggested, the event of July 23rd. So simply requiring that additional capacity that is currently been designed by the developer would then extend as an obligation to lot owners putting in additional dwelling units to ensure that the lot maintained that higher level of protection for anybody downslope against stormwater runoff.
I would like to ask Councilor Harris, who seconded the motion, would you agree to that?
I would agree to it. I think that the powers that are granted to the city in the covenants kind of already anticipate it, but I don't see any harm in really identifying it clearly as a condition that will run with the plat. And so, as Councilor Rivera has said, we won't be here down the road, and who knows when the homes and potential accessory structures would be developed, but I think having a clear statement is not a bad idea. So yes, I agree.
Okay, I will agree to the friendly amendment.
Okay. Good. Other discussion before we go to the vote? Counselor, no. In that case, there are no further items to discuss. Would you please call the roll?
Councillor Ives?
This is on the motion to deny with the amendment.
Addition.
Yes.
Councillor Liddell? No. Councillor Rivera?
No.
Councillor Romero Worth?
Yes.
Councillor Vihel Coppler?
Yes.
Councillor Villarreal?
No.
Councillor Beita?
Yes.
Councillor Harris? Mayor Weber?
Yes.
Motion has been approved.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I would like a motion, I would like to make a motion to direct staff to prepare findings of fact and conclusions of law reflecting this decision.
Okay.
Councillor Lindell?
You want to vote on directing them to do it?
Point of clarification, can you read that again? This is the...
Directing the staff to prepare findings of fact and conclusions of law.
based on the recommendations of the Planning Commission.
Appropriate, Peter? Are we in the right zone here? Go ahead. You have a question?
I have a question for Ms. McSherry.
Hold that thought. Hold that vote for 1 minute.
Why do we need to have a motion to direct staff to prepare these findings of fact and conclusions of law?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Lindell, whether we absolutely need to, I think is potentially a question, but you did modify slightly the findings of fact and conclusions of law. You added a condition as the governing body just now. So any additional would be just the Planning Commission plus anything to support that condition that was added.
Okay. It's clear enough to me that it's clear to everybody where the vote went, so I don't see any reason that we shouldn't proceed with the formalities of the findings and facts and conclusions of law, so I'll say yes to it.
Hang on, Councilor Rivera.
Sorry, is there, Ms. McSherry, is there still not an appeal process that can happen after this prior to the, or is this it?
Mr. Weber, Councilor Rivera, do you mean to appeal the governing body's decision?
Between now and when, typically when findings of fact and conclusions of law are done sometime later?
If you're just adopting the Planning Commission's finding of fact and conclusion of law and just adding the condition and you don't need additional ones, then I don't think you need to adopt additional. But if you do want us to prepare findings of fact and conclusions to support that condition, if you don't feel like they were clear, then that would be the final action when you adopt those, and that would be the appealable action.
Okay, let's
Continue. Councilor Rivera.
Yes.
Councilor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Councilor Vihel Coppler.
Yes.
Councilor Villarreal.
I don't understand why we're voting on this, so I'm going to abstain because I don't understand. We've never voted on at this time our findings of fact after we make a vote.
Councilor Beita.
Yes.
Councilor Harris.
Yes.
Councilor Ives.
Yes.
Mayor Weber.
Yes.
Motion has been approved.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody for your patience, both at that first hearing and tonight. And I appreciate everybody's abiding by what I think we all admit is a very complicated and difficult process, putting us in the position of being a quasi-judicial body, which is quite different from what we do as a city council on an ordinary series of meetings, and we are obviously still working our way through the process and trying to find a way where everybody gets their questions asked and a chance to participate in the hearing. So thank you for being patient and being thoughtful and being considerate of yourselves and of each other and of us. I appreciate that. If there is no other business, the meeting is adjourned.